Hello and welcome to my final assignment. So before I get started on showing you my products, we need to do a bit of a story time. And that story time starts a little more than 3 months ago. I was working on my toolbox assignment. My toolbox assignment was basically a science communication. This is like climate science communication to the rest of the people in the minor. And that communication was how to eat as a climatarian. We did a workshop on how to eat better. And I enjoyed that a lot. At about the same time, I was asked to go to the ISD students, which are built environment students. They do urban planning, mobility planning, and urban design as well. And I was asked to review their concept pitches. So what happens when you go through this course, the course that I went through and that I'm finishing now, is that you're given an area and you're told to redesign the area so that it works better and so that it can get redeveloped. And so these students had an area that they had developed, they had done the research on, and they'd done some visualizations, and they had a pitch to give, and then on approval they would develop the plan further into something more concrete. So we went in, and myself with a couple other colleagues, we listened to these pitches, and I was very impressed with the sustainability element in it. I was like, wow, these students are promising circular neighborhoods and zero carbon neighborhoods, and I was very impressed and excited to hear how they were going to achieve this, because I had gone through the same thing not 2 years earlier, and I guarantee you I had no idea. This was not part of our syllabus and had not been discussed much. So once the pitches were over, I raised my hand and asked them the questions every time and in almost every group. And as soon as you put a little bit of pressure on figuring out exactly how they were going to achieve these ambitious goals and these buzzwords they were using, it all fell apart. And that was really disappointing, that they were using these words very hollowy. They had read it somewhere and they knew that it was valuable to have these things and they knew it was a marketable thing, but they didn't understand what it meant, never mind how to achieve it. And this really upset me, because I had later that year, in my second year, I had started to understand that sustainability in the built environment is really undervalued and needs a lot of work and a lot of passion behind it. So seeing this in the flesh, how our course had failed these students, I was upset, I was angry. I reached out to the head of our course and I lodged a complaint, and he agreed. And the new year, the syllabus is redesigned and a lot more sustainability is being discussed in the new courses. But that still leaves the fourth year that I'm in, the third year, the year below, and the second year. All of those 3 years are now going to become professionals with zero sustainability knowledge. So I decided I couldn't accept that issue within the course, and I decided I was going to do something about it. So I did some research. I decided to educate myself first properly to where I was confident. So I did a couple of weeks of research, digging into different papers, digging into different urban plans, trying to understand the science behind some of the sustainability claims from a carbon and energy perspective. And then finally, I developed a talk or a workshop that I could give to these students. It turned into more of a talk because there was so much information I had to convey in a short period. I was given between 30 and 45 minutes, which each of the year groups. So it had to be quite dense and quite quick, as you'll see shortly. So I went in November, I did 2 talks. I talked to the first and second years. And then in November, I did 2 more talks. And in November, I did 2 talks, the first and second year. And then in January 2022, I did 2 more talks to the third years and the fourth years. And these were really rewarding talks, really engaging. I had really amazing conversations with the students and with the lecturers. The lecturers were surprised that they understood very little of what I was talking about. And you could see that they were grateful that I had brought this to their attention and given them some tools to work on this. I was correcting their language where they were misusing it. But also having conversations with students trying to dig a bit deeper into how to think about this problem and how to engage with it in their designs was incredibly rewarding. And each time I did it, things came up and the talk was adapted and the workshop changed form a little bit to respond to that. And so yeah, that was the talks that happened. I was able to film the online one, which you'll see shortly. And then after that, I felt that I needed to have a bit more conversation with these students for the final assignment that you're now watching. And at first, I wanted to film it. I wanted to turn it into a little documentary thing. And I did try. I met with a couple students on different occasions and I tried to film them. I ran into a serious issue though, because they felt really uncomfortable behind the camera. A lot of the students weren't comfortable and they were either hiding away or they were over presenting to the camera and it felt not genuine and they felt uncomfortable. In addition, it wasn't particularly interesting to watch. So visually, it wasn't very pleasing. And recently what I've tried to do is cut down on my screen time and I've been uptaking for podcasts. So in the second half of this final assignment, there will be 4 podcasts, I believe. We'll see. And I really recommend that you take a chill pill and do the dishes or clean something or do the laundry whilst you listen to them, and hopefully 1 or 2 ideas will stick with you permanently, in which case it was worth it. But mostly the value that I created was with these discussions with these students to help them engage with this idea in a meaningful way, and hopefully in a way that will change how they perform as professionals in the future, and also their personal perspective on it. So yeah, that's what I have. So the first part you'll be seeing in just a moment is the final talk that I gave. I invited my connections on LinkedIn to view. Sadly, only 2 were able to show up, but I only gave a day's notice. And that gives you an idea of the kind of talk. Obviously, each one was slightly different depending on the year group I was giving it to, but it gives you a good idea of the message I was trying to get across and the depth I went to. After that, you'll hear 4 podcasts. The first 2 will be with second-year students. The third will be with a third-year student, and the fourth will be with a fourth-year student, or students rather. And this is just, the podcast was to bring them in after the talk. They'd all listen to my talk, and just to have more of a conversation instead of a one-way flow of communication. I wanted them to engage with it in a way where they had to ask the questions as well. So I encouraged them to ask each other questions and to ask me questions during the conversations. So the first half will be more visual, and then the second half will be more auditory, and you can do something else whilst you listen. But thank you. I really enjoyed this minor, and I hope that shows in the next hour or so. I think that this final assignment will be. And yeah, thank you for everything, and I hope you enjoy. Take your time, take breaks. Don't consume it all at once, because you'll be very tired and you won't be paying attention by the end. So take it in pieces. Bye. All right, so good hello and welcome. So this is going to be the last time I do this talk for a while, but I've had a lot of fun making it, developing it, researching it, and giving it and iterating a couple times to the different international spatial development students. And yeah, I'm just glad to have had this opportunity to develop the knowledge in myself, but also like spark some interest in other people. So it's called Low Impact Urbanism. Let's get at it. So the talk's objective is to understand basically what to consider when you're thinking sustainability. The reason why I'm giving this talk is that I went to some younger students' pitches for one of their redevelopment plans, and I was really impressed initially with all of these sustainability criteria that they were touting about their new developments. But as soon as you dig a little bit deeper, as soon as you ask for a few more details, it all kind of fell apart. So it became apparent that they were using these terms as like hollow kind of marketing terms to try and sell the project. And this happens a lot, like in the real world. People will use these buzzwords without actually having any kind of work done behind it to back it up. So that upset me, and I decided to do something about it. So this talk kind of gives you the tools and the way of thinking to kind of add a bit more substance to your sustainability practices or rhetoric or whatever. So the structure of tonight's talk, first we'll take a look at our contribution. This is quite a short section, but just to recap exactly how we got here. The next is lexicon. This is probably the most important section. It's got the most slides, and it's a little dull at times, but it's worth kind of hanging in there. And then the consequences, just recapping on that. There's some interesting ones. The philosophy, this one's also really interesting. Philosophy of low impact urbanism. Finally, some important elements you can consider when you design your sites, some like a checklist that you can kind of go through and be like, have I addressed all of these elements? So our contribution, obviously the urban space is as a result of, at first, a matter of survival. We had to tame the environment so that we could survive. And that was true up until probably the Industrial Revolution. And then after that, it became a matter of indulgence and kind of expansionism in some sense. Our standards of living have improved since the maturity of the Industrial Revolution, but not hugely, whereas juxtaposed to the environmental damage is massive. So I want to start this off with one quote by Thomas Hobbes. He said just before the start of the Industrial Revolution, he said in England, "If I desire to travel from here to there, my freedom to act can be impeded by as much as a high wall, an impassable river, or by another person. Any external obstacle that prevents me from exercising my power, that keeps me from getting what I want, or otherwise would be able to attain, diminishes my liberty. So you can see this sense of entitlement that that the industrializing nations had at the time. So think about that. Any high wall, any impassable river, or any person will not get in my way. I will drill a hole through the hill. I will build a bridge over the river, and I will remove the people that are in my way. So this is an incredible kind of place, I think, where proper urbanism began in the Industrial Revolution. I think it's important to be aware of that context. So my two guests, one of which can't use her mic, and the other who can. Anne, what do you think of, what are some like flaws with green and sustainable? I prefer environmental impact, and I'll explain why, but what do you think is like an issue with green and sustainable?
As terminology, I would say, sustainable is not necessarily like, you can talk about it in the social, in the financial, or environmental context. It's very vague. You can talk about sustainable development goals, which go into very different directions as well, and might even contradict each other depending on what development you're looking at. And green, then, there are things that are green but still have a massive environmental impact, depending on how you do them. So yeah, it's all very it's not measurable. It's not that measurable. You can frame it in however way you want, so it doesn't mean much.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I think that people use it wishy-washy wherever they like. They're chameleons hiding behind the words. And also, like, my other thought is that green is very corporately adoptable because it's a color. So you see like corporations painting that on everything, and it does work fairly well for the average person. But for us professionals, I prefer environmental impact. And the reason I do is because it's far more specific. It'll help you argue your point better. So if you are able to explain the environmental impacts, both negative or positive, of whatever you're doing, then you'll be able to justify yourself better. So environmental impact, the degree to which human object or activity creates a change to the composition and or process within the atmosphere or biosphere. So there you have that, like a lot more detailed kind of rhetoric to look at it. So for example, a scooter, before the scooter, you have all of the mining and the material extraction and processing. During the life, you have the petroleum that's used within it and all the pollution that comes from that. And then after, you have wherever it's going to go. So that's why I think that environmental impacts, like low environmental impact, is what us as professionals should be aiming for, and then use this structure as a way to explain it. And that takes us quite nicely onto the circular economy. So we were talking about that VESPA and how it has this very linear process. This is something else that came up a lot in the talks with students. And they were saying, yeah, like we'll have a circular economy within our neighborhood. And you're like, okay, but how? How are you going to achieve that? Because it's an incredibly difficult thing. One example of repair, that first one, which is by far the easiest to do. The UK at the moment has currently started funding town councils to put repair stores in their high streets. So I think by 2025, every town council has to have some kind of repair store available in their high street. So when you're shopping, you can always take like your toaster in to get repaired instead of having to throw it out. Same with shoes, same with all these things that when a professional does it, is not too hard to address. The materials need to be near endless, reusable. So that either means a biosynergy, where it's either entirely reusable, like steel, for example, has a very low degradation over time, whereas plastic does. Plastic can only get recycled 3 or 4 times before it starts. It needs to be mixed in with virgin plastic, whereas steel can be melted and reformed many hundreds of times before like the oxidation content builds up. Either that or it's completely biodegrade. So you either have a man-made system that loops this all back in, or you let the natural system do the same. And that's one of the only ways you can get to circular city. Another interesting element of this as planners or any kind of policymakers is how do you make this economically viable? How do you make what was waste into a resource that is cheaper than anything from the outside of your city or your space? A lot of like reuse of materials has to be designed into the policy from the get-go. Carbon neutral, another great one. There's a difference between carbon neutral and net carbon neutral. Net carbon neutral normally means that someone's buying a bunch of carbon credits, planting trees in a foreign country in the hope that they become net carbon neutral. But sometimes people will say carbon neutral when they mean net carbon neutral. Carbon neutral is incredibly hard to attain for anyone, especially in the developed world. I believe that this neighborhood that you can see on screen now is possibly carbon neutral. If they are growing more trees, 50% more trees than they're burning, then they're carbon neutral. So the cost in this picture, the carbon in this picture is in the foreground. You have the fireplace where they're burning for heat and energy for cooking. And in the background, you have the glass in the windows and the plastic of the chairs that both required a considerable amount of carbon to be created. So for this neighborhood to be carbon neutral, it has to have taken an area and is now growing plants which are absorbing carbon to build their structure. That's the only way. Let's take a quick look at scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions. This is quite a complicated thing. And I'll tell you right now that most professionals don't quite understand how to work with scope 3, but scope 1 and 2 are pretty easy. Scope 1 is all of the energy that you are directly responsible for. So everything that you choose how it's burnt or it's how it's used. For example, when you put fuel in a car, that is your scope 1 emissions. Scope 2 is when you are using energy that is outside of your field of control. For example, when you flip on the light when you get home, that's scope 2 emissions for you because you have no direct say as to how that energy is generated. Yeah, and then scope 3 is all of the economic activity that is stimulated by your existence. So driving the car and flipping the light both have carbon impact, but they have knock-on effects. So for example, the carbon cost of you just burning the fuel itself is your scope 1 emissions, but scope 3 emissions with that was the carbon that was burnt to get the fuel to you because you've stimulated that activity. So that's kind of the little distinction between the two. It's quite interesting. Urban resilient is something quite entertaining. I think urban resilience gets too much clout, whereas urban mitigation doesn't get enough. But it's important to understand resilience either way. I believe that there's two ways to do resilience. There's either diversifying your sources or enriching and enhancing the one network that you have. For example, think about like ecosystems. When you have one species that will only eat one other species, then if that like origin, the fuel species gets cut out for some reason, then they're impacted immediately. Whereas in other species, they eat a wide variety of their input. And that means if one of them goes down, if one of their feed species goes down, then they will still be okay because they have other options. And this often in a built environment perspective in like nations depends on how stable your nation is. So in the developing world, you see that a lot more of diversifying sources happening. So for example, instead of you being sure that the power will come on because the one system in the country does that properly, you have 2 or 3 ways that you can have energy and light or stuff that, you have candles and solar panels and a lot of blankets and stuff. So you diversify your solutions and your sources so that you have resilience. Whereas enriching would, for example, in the bottom right, you can see the vertical farm as a good example of enriching a linear economy or like a supply base. Because say, for example, in the future, when the weather gets really dry or really rough or something, the vertical farms will be better off than the crops in the fields. So you have those two methods of urban resilience. And then just fun at the end here, the lexicon, we're at the end of the boring stuff. There's solar punk, which I find pretty cool. Punk is just like anything alternative. Think like timber punk, steampunk, cyberpunk. But solar punk imagines a colorful, kind of nature inclusive world, which is quite cool. And then cohabitation as well is something that I think we're starting to reason about. You can see underneath the train there's deer, and that like bringing those species, instead of having a monospecies environment, we have more biodiversity within there. So, but you need cohabitations, you need strategies for cohabitation to make that work. The consequences we're all very aware of. Things are going to get intense, and that will have effects, which will have further effects on us. Some examples of stuff that will happen to you and I, like later in life, we'll see as these primary, secondary, and tertiary effects start to happen around the world, we'll see higher inflation of certain currencies where climate change hits the hardest. We'll see higher insurance rates on waterfronts and stuff, property. We'll see tighter restrictions. We're already seeing that at the moment with like carbon capping and so on. The restrictions of like what we can do as a species begins to get more and more tight. Social shifts, higher rents, higher energy prices, and more limited accessibility to goods. So that's something that we can almost certainly look forward to in our future. But we can, as professionals, do an incredible amount to get around it. So there are two parts of the problem as far as I see it, and as far as like this philosophy sees it. There's the biosphere, so the damage we're doing to the ground and the soil, which is not as pressing an issue, even though it's affecting biodiversity, is directly affected. But the one we are most worried about, or at least most humans are most worried about, is the fact that the atmosphere is rapidly degrading and covering us in a blanket that we don't want. And that causes city stress. Those two elements cause the stress, urban stress. The solution in your designs and in your policies needs to be based in high ecology to fight that biosphere damage in the past, especially in urban areas, and low CO2 planning and policy making to mitigate towards the atmosphere. Low CO2 or even CO2 negative, which is again very difficult to do. And that's how you create resilience, is by using those two elements in the front of your mind. We're getting towards the end there. This is our second to last one. So there's some things that we consider quite a lot. How do we move from A to B? So electric cars, walking, cycling, and how do we get and consume our energy, solar panels and stuff. That stuff that's all over the media and in everyone's consciousness, like every person's consciousness. But there's a lot more that you can do as a policymaker and planner or whatever to be just the next level. Some of them include, so this is an example of diversifying demands. This is my balcony. I have had tires out there over the summer, and I'm still drinking the mint tea that we made, which is quite cool. So that's an example of like where my inputs, so the third to last inputs, get inputs and do with their outputs. So that's reducing the impact. Cool thing. This is material use. CLT is incredible. At the moment, it's between 15 and 30% more expensive, and that's with an underdeveloped supply chain. But even at the moment, you have 80% less carbon for the building frame, and it's 5 times lighter and has a similar strength to concrete. And then this is another good example of good material choice. If you don't need it, why is it there? Another really good one. So these cob houses are really awesome. If this person walked away from their home, in 100 years' time, it would have all degraded and gone back into the earth, which is an important element. This is an interesting example. It's called Greenhouse, and it's in Melbourne. This architect decided that he wanted to play with how to fit all of the inputs and outputs that he needed as a family, his family. How could he create everything that his family needed in terms of food? And how could he process everything he needed on site? So it's a fascinating, and there are a couple documentaries on it. It's a fascinating case study. And finally is some of the software. Not enough people think about how you can do, for example, an overall structure to make sure that this cities or regions are collaborating together. Density is an important principle in planning, and financial cooperation is incredibly important. Also, something that not many people know about is the subsidies and stuff that are happening at the moment, and increasingly happening as progressive governments are elected and pushing money towards these things, as people really should look into what subsidies are available to them. This is a really good example from Utrecht in the Netherlands. This development is the closest thing I could find to a low impact development. You can see here the transport planning is interesting, but also things like how are we going to hold biodiversity in this space? I think that's just so important to have that interaction. As a QR code there, quick, if you want to snap a picture. 3, 2, 1. And there we go. That was kind of the presentation, just some things to think about. To finalize, I'll say, be honest. Don't use these words unless you have something to back them up. The second is we're needed. The world is like scrambling to try and reach their decarbonization goals. And finally, we're very lucky. We're so lucky to be at this time. I think we'll see more urban change in the next 100 years than we did in the last 100 years. So I'm super excited to see that happen. And I'm glad we can be a part of it. So yeah, thank you guys for coming in.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Oh, Felina, we can hear you. That's beautiful.
Yeah, I switched my devices.
I'm just curious, you kind of just skimmed over that, but could you go back to the slide with the house that would fully decompose, just a picture of that? The architecture was wonderful.
Yeah,
like,
one
if
second.
you could, and maybe I'm interested in that project specifically because the idea that the house can fully integrate back into Earth, yeah, you just had it.
Yeah.
Where is that?
Honestly, I didn't look into this example too much, but you do have this like relatively not frequently, but it's out there. So this will be a timber structure with a hay bale wall, which provide great insulation, and then cob and then liming. So that's the building methods that are happening here. And you get these beautiful curves with cob, like you can't get with anything else.
This is really inspiring. I'm probably going to Google reverse image search this at some point.
Okay, yeah.
And see if I find that. That's really cool.
Yeah.
I also love the picture of the mint plants where you showed that the reusage of the car wheels.
Yeah.
Wouldn't have thought of that, but that's such a great idea. We need to do that in our garden as well.
Yeah, I think like that raises an interesting question. Like, for example, recycled plastic. Recently, I saw an article saying that the price of recycled plastic has doubled since all of the manufacturers want to say that their products is recycled plastic. Is that really a good thing? Because, you know, plastic degrades over time and has to get thrown out eventually. You're just delaying the inevitable. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
My thoughts on that is that, you know, I actually don't think that plastic production itself is as much as the issue as the pollution that follows it, and that most countries lack the infrastructure or do not want to invest in the necessary infrastructure to have recycling to begin with, because the fact that it's getting more expensive also has to do with the fact that these infrastructures do not exist. So the investment there should be done so that it doesn't end up polluting.
But even if everybody had recycling, even if you snap your fingers and every country had a vast array of recycling equipment, the chemical properties of plastic means that it breaks down over time and it's no longer useful as plastic.
I mean, yeah, we don't have an end solution for that.
Yeah.
And I guess the best available solution we have at the moment to replace this, if we're not going into zero waste completely, is now we can still see your screen.
Oh, sorry.
Is that what we have here in the Netherlands, what some shops are using is that you have a biodegradable plastics, although I'm not sure on the science behind this, and I'm not sure on how far these are really being composted in the system at the end, or whether they're also just ending up polluting.
Yeah. And that's kind of my point, like for buildings, especially, like if you had like recycled plastic tiles, that doesn't like change the fundamental nature of the problem. We need to like uninvest in plastic entirely, unless we use plastic as a fuel source, because that's what happens in a lot of Europe at the moment. Is responsible waste management of plastic is burning it, because it is a petrochemical and it releases almost as much energy as petrol or diesel when you burn tons of plastic. So yeah, so
That's interesting.
Yeah.
They need to take care of the fumes, but at least energy.
Yeah, but I mean, if you burn the plastic, then it will emit tons of like toxic chemicals, right?
If you burn it, like that's why, for example, like our soft plastics have been designed in such a way that they will burn cleanly. So it's basically you're walking around with diesel, you know, a fuel source that gets used once, and then they burn it for warmth or to run turbines to make electricity.
But it's really interesting.
Yeah, it is fascinating.
Yeah, but to come back to about the plastic in general, I mean, it's better to recycle the plastic than just reproduce it. But I think, like you mentioned, it's just we need another solution. But I think that's the point, and it's really difficult because plastic is like such a big part of our daily life that it's, I think, for now impossible to just not use it. And although there are many replacements, it's still not enough, and it's taking forever to integrate alternatives in your daily routine. For example, just instead of using plastic dishes or something else made of plastic, it took so many years to just ban the plastic forks, for example, and to replace them by wood forks, and still.
Yeah, and it's still not a collective solution. It's an individual choice solution, which doesn't solve anything really. And I recently read something in plastic pollution, like apart from the environmental impact, we now figured out that the plastic particles can actually not, there was the assumption that there is a blood barrier that prevents plastic particles to enter the brain and cause damage. We now figured out that is not true. So we expect that there might be, well, it's difficult to prove because you would have to cut open the brain and see something, and at that point that person is dead. But yeah, we can have the assumption now that this is going to get worse.
So it's starting to accumulate in younger people. But
that's the one thing, and the other thing is that I read about regarding plastic recently is that you have oil spills, which is one thing. Those can be relatively cleared up, but what also happens is that you have entire ships crashing with containers that are filled with small plastic pellets to protect whatever they carry, and sometimes they carry nothing. It's just the plastic pellets. So you have tons of these, and they are now being washed up all along the eastern coast of the African continent. On the bottom of the ocean, it's completely filled. There's no sand. It's just plastic. Yeah. So we're really just beginning to see the problem here. So yeah, I'm happy if we can just recycle what we have now and completely stop producing it.
Yeah, but that's the thing as well. Like if you buy recycled plastic, then you're stimulating and validating the market. That's my opinion on it. So, for example, in school, they've recently put out a recycle and donate thing for your plastic bottles, but all you're doing is you're making people feel like it's okay to buy recycled plastic and to buy plastic because it can be recycled, whereas the truth is it's not. It either needs to be burnt or it goes into the, either into the atmosphere or the biosphere. There is no circularity with plastic.
Yeah,
it's true, but I think that's the thing, because people don't like to change their behavior, so they rather would go for an alternative. instead of
It's very interesting that you say they
changing.
don't want to change the behaviors, because there's the whole we use plastic thing was massively incentivized by the industry back then to use it in the way we do now. That's a very recent change. It's just now that the habit is there, we don't want to change it back.
The same goes for like oil in general, is them saying like, hey, we understand that our product's a problem, but we're part of the solution. We are the solution. Don't get rid of us. Keep buying from us. I think that's kind of the same from the plastic industry. It's like, look how good our product is still. Whereas if you just looked at it like, can it go round and round? Like aluminium is a good example. It takes a lot more energy to reform aluminium than plastic, but it can be done endlessly. So if you want to be an environmental drinker, buy the 6-pack of cans rather than the 6-pack of like plastic bottles. Same with glass. Glass is also a good one.
If I may, you touched on the topic of subsidies coming up and all such, and that people should be made aware of what subsidies they have. I saw like some interesting like projects going on where, you know, if you have a project that you have this platform and it tells you what subsidy you're eligible for, but I don't see that. It's not really in the public conscience, is it? It's not much in the conscience of entrepreneurs either. Do you see anything developing on that, or do you see how maybe us here can have a role in this?
I think just flagging it, knowing what it is first. So it takes a little while to research all the different places where you can get this money from, all the different organizations that are motivated to create change. And then once you have that list and you have that like resource, then just flagging it and getting as many people to know about it as possible. Because it means that A, they'll use it, but also B, they'll vote for it. They'll put like the public consciousness behind it as well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I'm interested in it from more the public organization's point of view than the planner's point of view, and like what's the role of government in this. But yeah, from the individual, there's also something we can do.
Yeah, I think I'm actually working at the municipality here, so kind of government. And yeah, that's basically what we're working on at the moment, creating a new website that connects different groups with green initiatives, and basically to get their uptick of using these subsidies much higher is one of the goals. So it's interesting.
That's wonderful. You mean now for South Africa?
No, I'm still in Breda.
Oh, you're doing this in Breda, okay.
My commute to work is like 4 minutes. Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, thanks guys. I should wrap up now if I can. So what happened was, so I'm doing my minor, right? So that's the first, and I think for you guys too, like you follow the same structure, I believe. I think. But basically it's the first 6 months of your last year, you do the minor, and then the second 6 months you do the graduation internship.
Yeah.
So I am now finishing my minor and I've already started my internship, so it's quite stressful overlap. But my minor basically, to my minor there were 2 parts, basically like a baby like half version and then the full version. And the baby half version I did was a workshop on how to buy better at the grocery store. So what to consider when you're going to buy, like how to be like a climatarian eater instead of just, yeah.
Cool.
So that was kind of like the start of it, and I chatted with my classmates about it. And that was just kind of like interaction and learning and discussion. And so I just took the same thing and I scaled it up, and that's why I did the talks with all of the year groups. And yeah, so that's kind of what this is now. It's the like a representation of the work, just to discuss and like just show that like we've had these discussions, and you know that's the value behind it. So that's where these questions are for, just to like trigger that little bit of interaction.
All right.
Well, welcome to the podcast. So today will be our first episode. We're talking with 2 ISD2 students. This will be the first of 3 conversations that I have with ISD students. The value that I'm bringing during this minor is just having these discussions and shedding a bit of light on a topic that I felt our degree didn't pay much attention to. And yeah, so without further ado, I have 2 amazing guests here that we've just had a great lunch with. So if you guys don't mind introducing yourself, and yeah, what are your names? Who are you? Where are you going? That kind of thing.
Yeah, I'm Marco. I'm from Angola. I grew up there. I've been living in Europe for the past 7-ish years. I've always had an interest for spatial planning, always played the SimCity games and so on. They started there, and then as I moved from Angola to Europe, I really felt that how much a city matters to people's lives and that and the nature around it. So that's a bit of myself.
Cool. And any kind of consciousness yet? I know you've got 2 years left in your degree, but is there a particular direction that you're more thinking about?
Oh, I'm still super. I guess a direction could be developing countries.
Okay.
So Angola,
very
Africa as a whole. I find that the potential is just so incredible, right? Because people in Angola, like, they have the city is planned for cars, but people neglect that and make small sort of 15-minute city things going on where there's markets and stores everywhere, and I love that. It's just like this.
It's so incredibly organic.
Yeah, it's people just do it, and it's such an amazing thing to see.
Nice.
How much they care for their own city.
Well, that's exciting.
So I'm Anna. I'm originally from the Czech Republic, and I moved to Breda just a few months ago, and last September. Even though I'm a second-year student, I just started studying basically because I chose the 3-year track. I kind of felt too old to start from the beginning. I only wanted to speed up my career process. So I came back to Europe after 2 years of living in the United States, where I had plenty of time thinking of what I want to do with my life. And I figured I want to leave here behind me some positive impact on planet Earth. And I was always into architecture and design and stuff, and this just felt like a good way to go for myself. Yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. I think those moments between spaces in your life are so underrated, like gap years and sabbaticals and stuff. I personally believe that anyone that changes positions in their lives should take 2 to 3 months just to at least to reflect on where they're at and what that means for them. And then you can make informed decisions instead of just letting the entropy of life just push you into new things and new opportunities. That's how you end up at 55 going how did I get here?
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I took basically 4 gap years, and I'm very grateful for it because as I said, I had plenty of time to figure out what I want to do, and honestly, we spend so much time of our lives in work, and I just wanted to choose the path I want to follow until the rest of my life possibly, and just doing something meaningful.
You can definitely feel that as well in our class.
Definitely.
There are a couple of people who've just gone straight from high school into the university. You can just feel that lack of life experience in them.
That makes sense.
I've been there before. I don't judge it, but
No, definitely. It's just something you notice every now and then.
I think it's interesting for us because it's the first time when you're in university, when you're in a space where people are at different levels of maturity, whereas all through junior school and high school, you're all kind of in the same band. And I think that's why it stood out to you. It's because whoa, this is we're not really the same. We're kind of in different places. It's not nothing against you, but this is just a new experience for me.
I never thought of it like that, but definitely. It's definitely that.
That's very interesting. All right, so we'll start out with a little bit of a bummer, but an interesting kind of thought experiment. Have you ever communicated publicly how the climate crisis makes you feel? Outside of your friend group or your family? I'm talking to people you don't know very well.
Well, let me think. Maybe I think I expressed myself maybe on social media, Instagram, Facebook, but it's still pretty much within my social bubble, right? Friends, even though not very close friends, it's still people I've met personally at some point. So no, not really actually. No, honestly, I'm quite shy sometimes to express my opinions publicly. Because sometimes I'm not very confident about it. Maybe I still need to take some time to grow up and feel more confident about my opinions, I guess.
It'll come, I think. Confidence will come.
Not really. I think I've once or twice in a bus talking to someone, to a complete stranger, or in a plane talking to complete strangers in that sense, or I've been to several youth projects around Europe, and there you do speak of it, but I do feel that it's not quote unquote new information for the people that I'm saying it to most of the time. But I guess I have expressed that to others.
It's an interesting kind of just thought that I've had in my head recently is to what extent should we be expressing ourselves publicly? For example, when this is recorded, the Dutch voice scandal has just happened.
Yeah.
And we see in a lot of classes and stuff, people like, I know I was in the research class, I think, we were all in the same class. And Nick, our lecturer, stopped and took the time to say, listen, like, this is not okay. And I'm here for anyone that needs the help.
Yeah.
So he was going out of his way to stand by a value publicly. And yeah, like, how does a climate crisis version of that happen that doesn't feel incredibly like jarring or something?
True. Yeah, I guess that there's a balance to it. I remember I worked as a pedagogue in this care home, and it was a very mixed place because you had people that were mentally incapable of many things, that had mental disease of some sort, and a lot of pedagogues who mostly, I guess you could classify as a bit hippie-ish in their nature, walking around with no shoes on, or just was very, and there people really spoke out about climate change and this and that.
Okay.
But to our students, I remember often that they just didn't care. They would just get annoyed at us, and they would just leave the place.
Okay.
I don't know if that applies for other places, but it's something I've at least noticed.
Yeah.
Because you should, right? You should talk about it.
Yeah, but it's hard to do it well so that people don't like turn you off. You know, like, it's hard to do it well so that people want to listen instead of like turn you off, because like nobody wants to listen about sexual harassment. That's not like something that someone wants to listen about in their morning. But it's an important thing to be discussed. Yeah. But yeah, it's an interesting example. I wonder, in that example, did they talk about it because they knew that they had like-minded people within the staff? At first, though, like tell our listeners, let's pretend that one of them doesn't fully understand what a pedagogue does.
Yeah. So my job was, so many of these people, we had two facilities. One was for long stay people, so people that their mental stabilities or incapability is so extreme that they can almost not participate in society in a normal way. So they will always need help.
Okay.
Right. And then we had another facility where I focused on, where we have people that have several mental instabilities or incapabilities and have usually also ended up in some drugs or alcohol, which have made it worse. But they have the possibility, the capability to, in the future, live by themselves and
reintegrate.
Reintegrate in that sense, and just be able to be themselves and choose what they want to do instead of just being a drug addict that can't do otherwise because they never finished 5th grade, for example. Right. Okay. So that's a lot of what we did.
Okay.
What was the previous question?
So yeah, the first question was, do you think that those kind of hippie dudes that preached about it did it in part because they had like-minded people around them?
It's possible, but also the school was very active in protests and so on.
Okay, all right.
I remember when there was the Friday for Future protests. Basically, all of that side of Denmark had nothing to do with that. It's the Bible Belt in Denmark. That's our version of that. And there's also a lot of climate skepticism. Not as much in some places in the world, but there is a bit. Though no one did anything for these Fridays for Future. And we were the only ones that were out there and constantly moving and organizing with schools and going to different places and participating in these massive...
having your say.
Yeah. So I think many of the people would say still their ideas, even if there weren't others around not the same.
Cool. So I listened to a podcast the other day, and it would be a perfect resource for anyone who would like to share this information with religious friends or family. And it's just a Christian woman's experience, and she's an advocate for the Christian community engaging with climate change and caring about climate change. And she quotes scripture as to why it is God's will that the Christian community take care. So this is an incredible podcast. All of the links for all of the pictures that you see on the podcast will be linked in order in the description. All right, cool. Well, I mean, the natural kind of building on that is how do you feel? Because I mean, we know each other, but not super well. So this is an opportunity to kind of little tester, kind of get comfortable with it a bit. How do you feel about the climate crisis that kind of our species is facing at the moment? And like, you don't have to be, just be honest. It's not, there's no point in kind of acting about it at all.
Yeah, it hit me actually pretty hard, especially in the last year. I was thinking about it quite intensively, and I think like the visions are not very positive right now. Like if we only talk about the feelings from the climate crisis, and really interaction makes me doubt about the future. Maybe like the humanity will preserve like another 100 years, but the question is more like how sustainable will be the life on planet Earth, and like how comfortable it will be. And I kind of like trying to I'm trying to deal with it, like with the vision for my future, because I think we have to adjust our expectations from life, and it's never gonna be the same. It's never gonna be like, maybe like I have siblings who are 11 and 13 years older, and it's like a half generation, right? And they more like they have more like a old school expectations from their life, to just like have kids around 30 and go to work, and have cars and just like living this consummate kind of life.
Consumer dream.
Exactly, yeah. And with my partner, we are like more concerned about our lifestyles and our future. And actually, it brought us to the question where it's a good idea to have kids, actually, because like, is it a good idea to raise more people on planet Earth, because like we are growing in such a rapid pace? And I don't know. It really makes me feel pretty concerned about my own future, and of course like society's future.
I think we'll definitely experience a lot of like lifestyle change in our lives for sure. And we actually had this conversation in our minor. It was a bit of a hot topic, but basically I put to the group that it should be socially immoral, or kind of like socially unacceptable, to have more than 2 children. And our minor was, I think there were 2 or 3 guys out of the 28 people. And obviously, women tend to be quite maternal even before having kids.
Right.
That's kind of like the trend in our society. So there was definitely like some grind, some cognitive dissonance between, that makes sense, but I really fucking hate that makes sense. But yeah, definitely, I think a lot of people in our like age group that are actually paying attention will be having these same kind of feelings. So yeah, thank you for sharing. That's nice to hear.
I come with a bit of a different perspective, because I personally hate when people are constantly saying, oh, in the future, because where I'm from, it's not the future, it's now. It's 2 years ago, it's 5 years ago. The south of Angola has been suffering massive droughts for the past 4 years. It's always been a dry place, and the culture that is there has adapted to that. And they've always been able to get water. But when it doesn't rain for 2-3 years, right? When like previously it didn't rain for like 8-10 months, but they survived. They know how to do it. They know their country. And now when it doesn't rain for 2-3 years, it's a very clear where you're like, yeah, climate change, not a discussion here. It's a real life thing that you live. And then you see that like people die because they have nothing to eat, or down in the south, it's a very big cow culture, I guess you could say. They have huge herds, and one of the years was like, I don't know, some 70,000 heads of cow just died, just had nothing to eat, and then the people that are there have no commerce, no money, and no food. So for me, it's a very different of a like, I'm generally terrified for people that I know sometimes quite well that are in these situations.
And how does it make you feel? Because obviously climate migration is one of the things we all need to be considerate about. And that's one of the regions where, I guess the point where you can only get so good at getting water, but if there's no water to get, then you've got to move. So what do you think that would look like in your region in the next 15-20 years?
Already now, a lot of people are moving northwards, because we do have a massive rainforest chunk. The part of our country is a massive rainforest, so a lot of people are moving up. But it is, I mean, these are massive countries, right, in Africa, so the culture is completely different, right? They don't have, down in the south, they live in what they call a kimbu. A kimbu is so it's a family, the family has a little, imagine as a village, and they have some sticks around to make a wall, and then some wooden huts in the middle. And that's the one family that lives there. That might be the mom, the dad, maybe the grandparents, if they're still alive, and literally like 30 kids for that one couple.
Right? A couple aunts and uncles as well.
Possibly.
The surviving generation.
The
surviving generation below.
And then, I don't know, 2, 3, 4, 5 kilometers away is another one. and that's another family, and then it just spreads throughout the entire part of the south like that. And some have little bits of farming and such, but mostly it's in that cow thing. And in the north, it's completely different, where it's just more centralized and people are a bit more based on farming and so on. It's a massive change for people to and it's not like the people in the north also sometimes don't have it as it's not like they just have to give. They do help, but it's not that, because we have a lot of people coming from Congo escaping the war, and a lot of people coming from the migration.
A lot of pressure
in that one spot, especially in the city of Luanda, the capital. A lot of people just move there because that's the city of potential, but it's also a very dry place.
Very like difficult to deal with that stress of like dealing with these people and giving them a quality of life they can be proud of.
Yeah, exactly. Because it's also a massive cultural change for these people. Some of the older generations that I've met when I was down there, they said they will die there. They won't move. They will die with their cows there in the south.
Okay. Anna, what changes do you think will hit the Czech Republic first? Where do you think that'll be felt first?
Well, it might be surprising, but one of our also current challenges is drought. Like Czech Republic is.
Wouldn't have thought.
Yeah,
I'll be honest.
Yeah, right. It's right in the middle of Europe, but we are actually having quite serious problems with, trying the climate. Actually, it's. I don't want to blame publicly here our prime minister, our ex-prime minister, but like he's right. Yeah, he was also an owner of like a big agriculture company, which it was planting and still planting this kind of plant. He actually made oil of it. I'm not really sure what is the name in English for the plant. It's like this really yellow plant and like
linseed oil or something.
Yes, yeah, like a mustard plant, kind of like that.
Rapeseeds.
I think so.
Maybe.
Yeah,
I'm not sure. We'll research it after this.
Right. Yeah.
Voice over this.
Yeah. Sorry for lack of my knowledge, but and like we are always joking that Czech Republic turns yellow in the summer because like all the really like vast majority of the fields are very like monocultural, like plant-wise, because this big company is owns like a lot of fields and land in the Czech Republic, and they're like prioritizing planting this, let's call it mustard plant.
Yes, okay.
And it's actually really difficult to handle it because it requires a lot of water.
Okay. And
the fields or like the watering system, how it's made, it just doesn't work pretty well, and it causes like drying of the land. And
this is a good example of like in my talk we talk about the secondary and tertiary. Secondary was like the droughts happening, and tertiary was like the geopolitical issues, and that's where like we see in Africa as well with the damming of the Nile, where if someone's using a lot of water, despite how you do it, other people are going to be pissed. Like other nations are going to be pissed if your kid is not drinking because the next door country wants to exploit oil. How would you vote? How would you feel? So, it's interesting.
Yeah, it's of course it has like more reasons why the drought is happening in the Czech Republic right now. But recently I noticed there was one of the aspects like the society was talking about. I don't know. It's definitely also the climate change, and like the weather is becoming more unpredictable. Like last year, we experienced this pretty strong tornado in the south of Czechia. It was like really the Alabama strength of tornado. It destroyed 4 villages. 6 people died and 200 were injured. It happened all of a sudden.
Scary.
So yeah, it was scary. It was very, very scary. It was actually in my neighborhood.
Can you imagine just living in a country that doesn't have tornadoes? And
not at all.
Hey, we're a tornado country now.
Yes, exactly.
What people have to look forward to.
Exactly. So imagine their surprise, right? They were just like working in their vineyards and doing their stuff, and suddenly like the pretty strong storm came, and it was accompanied by a real life tornado. Like it destroyed 4 villages and 200 people were injured. There was no electricity. The train tracks were completely destroyed. Like it took away a bus with passengers and like it threw it 50 meters away. So it was like really serious. It was terrifying. But actually even the experts were discussing whether it is the kind of like a result of some sort of climate change or it was completely random, because it's very rare in this area. It like there are only like people who live they don't remember anything like this happening during their lifetime. Only there are like some sort of notes in like historic books like that there were some tornadoes like 150 years ago, but it's definitely something that didn't happen recently.
Okay. And then an interesting question that's kind of born out of that. Which do you think is the more kind of climate responsive culture between Angola and Czechia? Like, which culture do you feel, represents a better model of dealing with mitigating and resilience?
Well,
I don't know.
Okay. Not the government, I'm talking about like culture.
The culture,
in general.
right?
Because you'll know a bit more about the culture than the direct government.
I mean, a lot of Angolans, Angola is very centered in these big cities, right? But a lot of Angolans that live outside of that are in nature and depend completely on nature for their survival.
But that's a weird like connection though. You saying that like urban people don't rely on nature, where like
No,
that's kind of the feeling, right? It's
Yeah,
like we're in an urban space, so
Yeah.
kind of disconnected. Like you don't see it as much, and you feel just like less reliant on nature.
Exactly.
Whereas that's absolutely not true. Everything that you eat and drink comes from outside of this urban. Like concrete doesn't create food or water.
Yeah, definitely. But that is the feeling there is, because there are no parks. There's nothing, almost nothing of nature in these massive cities, right? It's just nothing. It's just literally concrete on concrete on concrete. Though I will say that whenever people in Angola have an opportunity to plant something, they do.
Okay.
If you go to a place where, for example, my mom lives in this, I guess you could call it half-gated community. It's a pseudo place in between.
Yeah.
And there, every single house has 2 mango trees, an avocado tree, a couple of papayas, a couple of tomatoes growing in the garden. There's a lot of this happening. So I guess.
But does that extend down the class chain?
Yeah. So if people in poor neighborhoods have space, right? If they are living in these informal settlements, usually they might have a little bit of space somewhere, so they'll plant a papaya tree because they take no space at all.
Okay.
And then even in these massive developments they made basically a city of 300,000 people, just like 5 kilometers away from where my mom lives, and there as well in the past it was just grass lawns and it was a horrible place. But people were like, no, we're gonna make this nice. So they planted loads, and like people themselves planted. You can see because it's not this super organized, it's a very organic place, and people just plant all these trees everywhere. So I guess in that sense we're good, but we never think about nature.
Okay.
Never discuss nature or climate change.
Okay.
It's never discussed in the country, at least to my knowledge.
Well, I expect if one day you go back for work or something, it'll be on your agenda to start this conversation.
Big time.
Okay.
Big time. I already do it with my friends.
Nice.
I always already push them in that sense.
And then the culture in Czechia, how do you feel that responds?
Yeah, well, because I'm Czech myself, I believe I hope I can dare to say that, but I think like on a big scale, usually the society don't give a damn about ecology, at least when I compare it with the Netherlands, let's say, or Austria. I'm sorry to take in it like the political way again, but I think it pretty well represents what the society thinks, because if you look at the program of the political parties, there is only one party that represents sort of like a ecological program, and the rest they just don't care about it because it's not a priority of the population. It just doesn't sound very appealing. Like okay, let's ride more on bikes, or let's make the Green Deal happen, or let's get rid of the old cars because they just have like terrible emissions and stuff. It's just not appealing for society as a topic to talk about. And the political parties, because they tend to be more populist, they just reflect that and they don't care about it. So I think that's a sort of like a national mindset right now.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I don't want to only underestimate my country. And on the small scale or local scale, it's getting better.
Okay.
And it became sort of a standard that every family is recycling and like sorting out plastics and paper. It's just a standard, and like pretty much nobody is thinking about it. They just do it automatically. And so that's one of the good things, I think.
Okay, so each culture has their kind of like shining points, and each has their...
Definitely.
It's interesting to see the thing with the cars, because the moment someone has money for a car in Angola, you best believe they'll buy a car.
Yeah, just buy whatever else. I have the same reflection with Zimbabwe, and it's 100%. And this is where like I made that argument with you guys earlier. I think we had a discussion on it about how European values need to stay in Europe.
Yeah.
Because a lot of like lawns, for example, is a big thing in Africa. I see like lawn is another thing that was invented in France before the Industrial Revolution as a show of wealth. look at this land that I don't have to plant, that I can pay other people to maintain, which makes a lot of sense when you think about it like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, in Africa now, everybody has their house, which is quite big, especially by Dutch standards.
Yeah.
And they have a big yard, and it's all kind of lawned out. And we are also feeling the water, the water starting to get more and more erratic. And you're like, but what? And also it's walled. So the showing of your wealth is no longer a factor because there is a wall around it.
Yeah.
And none of these people passing by can look at your land and go, wow, these people have so much money. And a lot of people, like, the reason why the wall is there is to stop people from stealing from them.
Yeah.
And that's what a lawn does, is it shows wealth.
Yeah.
So there's like, once you like dig the layers deeper, there's these levels of like inconsistencies. And I think that, there's just these like conversations you need to have. Like, I understand that your parents had lawn, but like, why do you have lawn? Like, make this decision for yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think this is a bit different with Angola. We don't really have, at least that I have seen, lawns.
Yeah.
I don't think I've ever seen someone having a lawn. Only there's one park in the entire city in the Bay that has a lawn, but I do feel it has more of a purpose because it's
functional.
It's a functional lawn that people can sit on and enjoy. Yeah. But this sort of
That's
lawn
fine.
where no one,
against that.
where nothing happens, I don't think I've ever seen that in the country.
Okay. Well, there's a downside of Zimbabwean culture when it comes to that. But this is a beautiful segue to another question I have for you guys. And a negative remark I had from my minor lecturers that they're now going to listen to again because they need to hear it multiple times. And that's this issue of tradition and how that if we're going to make changes in our lives, we need to question these traditions. So I gave that one example about the lawn. Another good example is the kind of crime they committed in my eyes. We had this lady, so Agenda, I'm not sure if you're aware, sued the Dutch government in 2019 and they won. Agenda. It's an activism group headed by 3 people, 2 men and a woman. And I forget her name. It's a hard to pronounce Dutch name. So they won in 2019. It was quite a big deal. The Dutch government now has to do a bit better, or it's breaking its own law type thing. And she came to give us a talk, best talk that these guys arranged. It was amazing. And she was talking about all these things. And she was like, an interesting thing I can share with you is something that I've tried to adopt is don't bitch about a problem. Engineer a solution that's better than what you're bitching about. So for example, like she wasn't bitching about like car emissions. She helped build the original infrastructure in the Netherlands for electric cars. She had friends in China sending solar panels and electric vehicles over. So she was taking this more kind of constructive approach to protesting, which I will adopt. But anyway, at the end of that talk, we were talking about Christmas trees because this was just before Christmas 2021. And she was saying how she thought of them as like superfluous, like vanity projects that these people had, like a tradition that if you think about it, is just deforestation and then leaving it outside on the curb. It's, it doesn't go with her values at all. After that was the end of the talk. And she was handed essentially the same thing, which is flowers wrapped in plastic.
Yeah.
A plant that was planted for completely like visual pleasure.
Yeah.
Because of like what our society deems valuable, but that is now dying and had spent a lot of energy to create. Yeah. And that was handed to her, wrapped in completely unnecessary plastic.
Right.
And that's just one of those things where like if the teachers had slowed down and thought about, okay, this is a tradition that happens everywhere, but like how can we, especially as like sustainability minor lecturers, how can we reapproach this tradition? How can we invent something that makes the people feel valuable? Because that's something else about flowers, is it's so like generic. How can we make them feel valuable for coming and express our gratitude without creating this damage? Right. So yeah, I suppose, can you guys think of any traditions like that, or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, definitely. Frankly, it drives me crazy when people use sentiment or a tradition as an excuse for doing something that's not super ecologically conscious.
Yeah.
And they're arguing it like, oh, we've been doing this for years, decades, and it just worked out well. It's the problem, exactly. But unfortunately, not everybody and not every age group see it from our perspective.
Yeah.
And not everybody is like super interested in sustainability and stuff. And like also a generation of my parents, they already started to tend to like arguing with me, on the basis that, okay, Ella, but why should we change our behavior because we've been doing this for years, or this is our tradition?
It's worked for us.
Yeah, it worked for us, and it has this tradition value, sort of.
Yeah.
But yeah, I recently had this is not completely like a climate regarded, but it's a good example. Like recently I was arguing with my dad about horses, in the center of Prague in Vienna.
Okay.
I don't know if you know what I mean. Like, you know, it's sort of.
So what they do is they have those carts and
exactly.
tourists and stuff can go and pay for the horses to flop around town.
Exactly.
Oh,
It's like a coach and like dragged by horses, you know, and it's a sort of tourist attraction. And now, like the mayor of Prague, he wants to forbid this tourist attraction and just wants to get rid of it completely and just like forget it. I think it was ever a tradition. And yeah, actually, he got in conflict with people like from the city hall and also like from people from Prague or the Czechs. And they are arguing like, why should we ban it? Because it's a tradition and it's been here for years, and some people, some tourists still want to enjoy it. But yeah, it's a complete nonsense. Like why should the horses be there like year round, you know, and like suffer in the hot summers that are becoming quite unbearable in July in the center of Prague, city, right? And last year there was a horse that died because of the heat in Vienna. And so like the mayors are also arguing with this, that it's not suitable for animals anymore to just stand there the whole day, and they're pooping, right, and stuff. So it just doesn't bring any benefits from it. Yeah, and like my dad, you know, he's like in late 50s, so it's just to imagine the generation. And he was arguing like he didn't have a good reason.
This is part of part of who we are.
Exactly.
So how do we get people to question tradition more often? So like we all agree that tradition is very flawed, very dangerous, especially from a sustainability perspective. But can we think of any ways that we can make people question tradition more often and help with these older people to break down those barriers quicker?
My first thought is information.
Okay.
Properly informed. Because I had no idea about this with horses. Yeah. As you started talking, I was like, why horses? I don't get it. Yeah. I was like, oh, they're suffering. Now I get it.
Yeah. I think like I would have taken that horse's name and I would tell the story of this horse.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Died in the streets. Like, because then there's like
there's an emotional
you humanize it, and then there's an emotional investment in it. So that's maybe one strategy.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
In that sense, I think that is a good thing. I think it's a very hard thing to do. Like.
It is difficult, yeah. Like my argument when I was in this argument with my dad was that traditions don't have the value anymore because we just have to kind of like rethink what are our values and prioritize the well-being and just forget about traditions. But I figured like this is argument that most of the people won't take because it's not good enough, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know.
Tradition that could replace a tradition might be a thing.
Okay, interesting.
I don't know.
Giving them something else to be part of.
Yeah, maybe that would be because there might be an emotional connection, for example, with the Christmas, right? There might be an emotional connection to it. For example, we obviously don't have Christmas trees in Angola, so everyone that has money has a plastic Christmas tree. Yeah. But when you think about it, okay, plastic, not good. But we've had the same Christmas tree since before I was born. Yeah. I'm 24 now.
So in terms of straight, like maybe biologically it's not great, but in terms of the atmosphere, the CO2 is almost certainly much better to have a plastic
tree. I can imagine that would be better because it's just, and it's still going strong. I'm probably going to have that till I'm 50.
Yeah, have it for your kids.
Right, it just keeps going.
Yeah, you know, generally it works when you take baby steps towards the change, so it doesn't hurt that much. Like for example, when we are like when we are talking about the Christmas trees, like this Christmas, my partner and I, we bought like this little Christmas tree in IKEA that's living, but it's planted in pot. So we're hoping, so we're hoping
you can just use that
exactly,
exactly,
and it's actually growing. It's growing pretty fast. And it's thriving, you know.
Hopefully not too fast.
Right.
Right.
But then we can cut it in half and give it to neighbors. Or
that's true.
That is a very nice idea, actually. I can imagine that.
So yeah,
I think it's hard. Like as we were saying about tradition, I also have an example from my dad. This is more urban planning based because he's an engineer and he has self-taught himself a lot of things, and he was a hippie. He's been doing all sorts of activism ever since he was like 15 or something. He's 63 now, right? Like he's just been going his whole life. Yeah. And then we were discussing about how to build a city. For example, there was more focus on Rwanda, and he's always had this idea of single family homes, and everybody has their little garden and stuff. And in his head, it's about being able to use that garden to do something with. But at the same time, when I tell him, for example, no, that leads to car dependency. That's pollution.
That's sprawl.
That's sprawl. And he's like, no. And this is someone who every single day sends me 10 links of the UN and UN Habitat and is super informed. Yeah. But on this specific thing, you cannot tell him that a taller building is better than
better. Yeah.
And So I
But that's where you
thinking,
need to put a map and a sketch. What's that paper called that we draw on?
yeah, sketch paper. Yeah.
Sketch paper, and you just say, right, you show me how we can put 3 million people in a city without it turning into like the size of London.
Yeah.
You know, if you do that single, like, show me how to do this. Like,
yeah, maybe next time I'll try doing that, because it's just it was extremely frustrating. I would like, because it's just like you're someone who's so well informed.
Yeah.
So
we're just missing this key piece.
Yeah. So I don't know what would be the key to this tradition, right? Because it's also based on tradition that everyone has always had the single family home and the garden and the whatnot.
I think to wrap up tradition, my last suggestion would be just remind people that the downside of tradition. Remind people that there have been traditions in the past that we changed for very good reason.
Yeah.
There are a lot of traditions that we read about in history books that would be fucking horrific. And the things we
like
do now,
right?
the traditions we have now, kids will read about one day. You know, probably not on a tree-based book, but they'll read about one day from underneath their domes and they'll be like, fuck, this was awful. They had live animals in 43-degree heat. That's just cruel, man. So yeah, that's another tactic to get rid of tradition. Is just remind them that tradition is not that valuable. Like, it's valuable, but it doesn't, you know, it's not a constitution that we must live by. Yeah,
yeah, exactly.
Cool. What other questions have I got here? Yeah, kind of also like with engaging with other people, because we will all integrate sustainability into our future careers. So I'm not going to push on that too hard, but I want to talk about there's this thing called ComSci. It's like this shortened phrase that I heard earlier today. That's or SciComm, sorry. That's a science communicator, and that's become quite a common term, I think, at least like in American circles. And these are people that just discuss with the public about the value of science and museums and research and so on. So these are people whose jobs, like, I don't know if you guys know Hank Green, the guy who does like YouTube videos and stuff. He's a classic example of a
crash
ComSci. Crash course. How can we engage that for like the urban perspective? Like, how can we talk to your dad, or what does ComSci look like, but for an urban space, the urban science rather than.
Yeah, I mean, there's also the same thing. Lots of YouTube channels coming up about it, but more than that, I don't really. I guess part of it could be have discussions of this on news channels or on more traditional media for the older generations. Because that's something that I think could be massively important. I'm again looking at it from Angolan perspective, because everyone there still has a TV. Everyone watches traditional TV in that sense. While Europe is just like Netflix. That's it. But there, I guess, having these constant discussions about or information times, because the government does that now with informing about all sorts of different things. So I guess
that's how you could approach it, is just try and angle some of this like good urban thinking into that content.
I guess that could be something you could do. I'd say, hey, if you take the bus, this and this, I think it'll be very hard, because, as I said before, the discussion of climate change just barely exists in Angola. It's really just never touched upon.
Can you think of any ways that we can do some science communicating, urban science communicating?
Right. I must admit, I don't know I'm not familiar with the project you mentioned, but well, in general, sometimes when I want to procrastinate, and while I still want to educate myself, like about living in urban areas and stuff, like I go on YouTube and like try to search for like some urban planning kind of like videos and topics channels. And there is actually not that many good or interesting or interactive channels like what I could subscribe. There's just like a few guys that doing like
like 4 or 5 white men.
Exactly, 4 or 5 white men, and like the content is more or less the same.
That's representation.
So there is definitely like room, there's something to improve definitely. But I don't know, like maybe just make it more approachable on different kinds of platforms. Like I can think of organization from Prague in the Czech Republic. It's called Camp, and it's like a center of architecture and city planning. And I actually thought that's like an organization that's like run by the city hall or something, and it's just like more formal, and like taking care of, I don't know, zoning plans and such stuff. Sure. But it's actually like a more like a popular, like a making how do I say it? Like they're making like the urban structures in Prague popular. You know, like what I mean?
Yeah, like popularizing, giving,
exactly,
creating a personality.
Exactly, yeah, that's the difficult word I cannot pronounce.
Sorry,
yeah, exactly. And they're like making tours, and they have this like sort of museum shop where what you can visit and buy some stuff, but it's not just about it, but it's more about like they have quite active website, and they're active on Instagram and social media, and they have YouTube account, and they're like making these talks, sort of like TED Talks, but like in a very local scale and like made by them. So I think that's a really nice
awesome.
that's really nice project. That capitals or big cities can do, and like to bring just to make it more approachable, like, you know, to the city residents.
I think New York has done something similar.
Yeah,
we saw
probably.
Video in class. That was in New York.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah.
I think for any built environment student listening, this is a beautiful example of like orgware being used to bring a space to life. Because it's one thing to design and build a like piece of a city, but unless you can engage with the people and like bring it to life and really give it character and like life, you know, make the people feel like this space has a characteristic that I can love, and I can miss, and so on. That's just such an important element. So yeah, I think better representation and there's just those like grassroots orgway stuff. Yeah, I would love to watch, like, there are a couple like female science communicators, and they just go like mental. They just love it. You know, there's just such enthusiasm over this like wacky thing that they're doing. So to watch like I don't know, a lady of color walk down some street somewhere and explain why this is just insane that they designed it like this, and like this works so fucking well. I can't believe it. This is incredible. Like that would be a joy.
Right. We women always go mental. Yeah.
no, not so much that. I'm just saying like that enthusiasm is what we need to communicate.
No. For sure. Yeah.
Walking down the street.
Okay, well then, yeah, kind of related to that, and I'm going to adapt it slightly. If you were in my shoes, we'll do this as the last question. So my goal was basically to do that, was to communicate urban science to the urban sustainability science in specific to the students beneath me. But obviously I have a certain set of skills. I'm quite social. So that's why I chose to do this route. If you were in your fourth year and you had to, like, you just had to talk to the public in some way, you had to get some idea when it comes to urban interaction, preferably sustainability, into these people, like what would be your personal approach?
I think I'd do smaller personalized workshops.
Okay.
I've done lots of these in my travels, and I feel they're always the way that gives the most impact into people's lives, because watching a video or watching something on the news or whatever, we do it so much all the time that I think it's easy, unless something isn't like incredibly good, like just fire, then it's very easy for us to just pass by, put it, we heard it, it was interesting, but we forgot it, like, oh, we were listening to it while we were making food or eating something, right? But my experience of a workshop where maybe you push people to do something a bit, not maybe out of their comfort zone, but a bit wacky, a bit uncommon, I think people will remember it more.
Okay, that's interesting.
So definitely I would do some sort of smaller workshops, because reaching a few people, but reaching them, actually reaching them, fully getting them on, I think would be interesting to see how that works.
Cool. How about you?
Well, I must admit I'm quite shy, like when it comes to approaching like people I don't know, and so at the beginning of the podcast I said, like, you know, I don't really talk publicly about like problematics and such stuff. So I think I haven't been thinking about it, like what kind of project I would do. But I think even though I'm not a big fan of social media, I would probably use this platform because I also see the benefit, like how you can impact like a mass of people, and it's quite easy to like post a post, you know.
It's not easy in the sense that you have to do the research and do the design for it.
No,
but the social,
like the way how you're spreading the information, that's quite easy. Compared to like organizing a workshop and like trying to invite people and make them to go there. So I like taking pictures of like urban areas and urban structures. Like I'm doing it on my personal Instagram. It's private though, so I'm not spreading it to the world. But maybe I would do something like that.
Maybe a public Instagram where you do photography of like urban stress to do with I don't know, like too much heat or not enough water or something. You have, you know, a picture of a horse struggling in the heat.
Exactly, yeah.
You know what I mean? And then just tell the story underneath it, and don't make it super sad because people don't want to like go back to that every day. But just they're all like brand it as like getting to know your city better.
Right.
You know, really having an intimate understanding of your city.
Yeah, and I think photography has just like such a power, you know, because like you can describe 1,000 things in one picture, and it's just like you don't need to have to figure out like long text or long speech, how to like convince people about something. It's just post a picture of like a dying horse in the heat, and it's powerful enough.
That's the kind of emotional stuff that won't pass you by.
No.
You know, even like it can mostly pass you by, but if you're sitting in front of the ballot trying to decide who to vote for, that'll be in there somewhere. There'll be a little bit of guilt hovering over the populist, you know, kind of traditional keep it the way it is vote. You'd be like, maybe not. Maybe that photo has changed my vote. So well, that's it's exciting to think about, and maybe you guys will you know, kind of integrate it into your careers, and I wish you guys all the best.
Thank you. Likewise.
Thanks for coming in, guys.
Yeah,
That was awesome.
Thanks so much for giving us opportunity and making us, or at least me, step out of my comfort zone. Yeah, it's nice. Thanks.
Yeah, it's good.
Cool. So, well, we're back again. So this is our second podcast with the ISD2 students. And yeah, it's really awesome. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thanks.
It's exciting. So we'll be talking today a bit about sustainability and just kind of like reflecting on a bit like in our lives, but also in our professional lives and so on. And yeah, would you guys mind introducing yourselves and just telling us where you're from, where you're going in life? Just
I'm Kim. I'm from the Netherlands, and I study ISD second year now. And I think where I want to go with studying ISD is mainly architecture, so more specific. But I also kind of want to stay in the creative field and explore architecture or graphic design, one of the two. So yeah, that's
cool.
And I'm Liv. I'm also a second year of ISD. From Brazil, and I come from a completely different background. And my whole family is involved in architecture and this sort of thing. So my influence is very big in that sense. But now that I started the course, I've really been interested in maybe urban planning and also mobility. I find it very interesting as well. But sustainability is something that I've always learned, especially from my parents, about recycling and upcycling as well. So it's a big influence in my life, and it would be really good to implement that in my job as well.
Yeah, that's awesome. Cool. Well, like this is a good kind of place to start, like kind of engaging with that a little bit. Awesome. Okay, so my first question is, have you guys ever kind of communicated in public how you feel about the climate crisis? So not like to your friends or your family, but kind of beyond that.
I don't know if that would count, but I was a member of the Model United Nations back in high school, and we sometimes used to discuss about climate change and everything, but it's mostly like a student-based kind of like experience. But like out in the world, I don't think I've ever really done that. And I'm not sure why. That's actually a really good question.
Me neither. I don't really remember anything. Maybe with my parents and their friends having like arguments about it, or like other friends of mine, but that's about it.
Yeah.
I think.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, as a natural extension of that, as a safe space, I mean, we know each other, but not super well, so kind of counts as public. How do you feel about the climate crisis? How did you come to realize it was an issue, and how do you feel about it now? And you can be honest. You don't have to act it up.
I think for me personally, as I'm growing, I'm seeing how important it is for us to tackle the climate crisis. And I think that in recent years, I've seen how we're not tackling it, how we're not doing a good job on it. So I think it's something that's extremely important for us to do something about it, because the world right now is just not great, and everything on the news is just horrible. And we keep seeing, I saw the other day this news that about I forgot what the name is, the clock that they're talking about, like where the
Day zero?
Day zero, yeah.
The water, was that something to do with water mostly?
No, it's also
right.
about the whole climate and everything, how we don't really, like, they didn't expand the time, didn't extend it. They just, it's going to remain the same this year, because we're not doing anything for climate or anything. We're not trying to improve the world at the moment, so.
We're not buying more runway.
Yeah, we're not, really not.
So as we get better, we reduce how quickly we eat the runway, so yeah. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so that's how you feel?
I think I don't know when I began to know. For me, like, splitting waste was always like a thing in my household. I think the Netherlands started with splitting like plastic pretty. I don't really remember when we just had one bin of stuff. But in the last like years, especially with ISD, I have discovered that like it's very deeply rooted in the way that like especially Western culture has evolved through centuries, that it's just led up to the point where we get to this point where we don't really have solutions that we could quickly implement without making it an argument between people and stuff. And I think it's also very troublesome as like someone who comes from Western Europe to see the problems happening in other continents, because you know that sometimes it's not also appreciated if you go there. Like in Africa, the only hope I think and like the best thing they can do is have young people from there like go and not make the same mistakes we did in Europe and have a different transition than we are. I think also looking on YouTube and being very involved with social media, just watching channels of people traveling through different countries and seeing how different countries are tackling it, I think it's very fascinating. Looking at Norway, for example, like it's a very expensive country, but I discovered that like 98% of the energy that they produce there is from renewables, which is a thing that if it's plausible to reach in other countries, it's a big impact already.
For sure.
So you talked about the whole like trash situation, and in Brazil, for example, where I come from, my household, we had this idea of recycling plastic from everything else. But in Brazil itself, you don't really have those separate bins everywhere you go. Everything is just mixed. And that's something that's completely different here in Europe. You always have, wherever you go, you have the separate bins. And I think that's just a great idea. But sadly, in a lot of parts in Brazil, everything just gets thrown away together. And it's such a waste. Because, of course, plastic doesn't decompose as fast as everything else.
Yeah, not nearly. Yeah. That's interesting. All right, cool. So why, to you personally, like how will you integrate sustainability into Korea? Like what kind of gentle strategies have you thought about? I know you guys are still a while off, obviously graduating and stuff, but just a gentle reflection on that.
I think those self-sustained buildings are very important, especially when it comes to energy consumption. So maybe having solar panels. What else?
There was a building somewhere I heard about that they have a positive balance in energy and consuming it. So they basically, throughout the lifespan of the building, they produce more energy than they would even like use, even with demolition included. I think that's also like a thing. Looking into more like specific engineering things for me in architecture would be a good thing to go towards, reusing materials, using materials that will last longer, that don't like impact the built environment in a negative way that you have to fix it later on.
Yeah, not throwing away.
Yeah, I think also one very nice concept I stumbled on like a few months ago was a video about biomimicry, which is like, biomimicry is basically where people in engineering, we basically make like cars or buildings from inspiration from stuff that other people have made. So mankind has made. But then some problems are better solved by looking at nature. So sometimes they advise to have like someone who's an expert in nature to be there to solve problems. So for example, like with transportation and mobility in Japan, they had a problem where a train went through a tunnel and came out in like an urban neighborhood, and it had like a sonic boom when it like went out. And they looked, and basically the leader of the engineering team to fix that was also a bird watcher. So they basically tested different noses of trains in like a tube and measured how much noise it would make. And there's this bird, the kingfisher, that the guy knew, and it's basically a bird with like the beak or like snavel beak. It's basically formed in a way that he can get fish out the water without even like disturbing the water mostly, and making any sort of like noise or trace of him being there.
That bubble around the creature as it travels.
Yeah,
and
so
it can get all the way back up while still
yeah,
in
it's
that
very
bubble.
quick and it just goes out and it's not really noticeable. So they made one of the noses like that, and it proved to be the most efficient. So what happened was the train was faster with that nose. It was more energy sufficient, and it was a significant noise reduction when it went out. Because what happened was with the original noise is when like it goes through the tunnel and builds up this pressure up, and there's this pressure of air like in the tunnel until like the train pierces that bubble at the end. Then you get that noise. But that nose of the train that they developed from the Kingfisher like as inspiration didn't do that. So that's like a very interesting thing, I think, that biologists and nature experts can like contribute to improving ways that mobility and other things.
That's awesome. You can
evolve.
be like you can be an engineer or a built environment specialist of some variety, but have very close links to a biologist. And every time you sit down to design something, you're like, okay, you know, what can we integrate from nature into this? Another good example of this is in the capital city of Zimbabwe, where I live. There's this one building that's quite famous for copying a termite mound. So termite mounds are in the ground, and then they have these chimneys to vent heat, because there's quite a lot of energy that's being released down there. And basically the same structure was taken for a tall building. It was hollow in the middle, so it had like this two verandas on either side that like looked at each other. And at the bottom it was open, but it had lots of like leafy greens, lots of water features and stuff. And at the top there were like chimneys. So the heat rose, but it also sucked, like then you have a vacuum, you have a pressure difference, which then sucks warm air past the leaves and the water, which cools it into the body of the space. So yeah, so I love biomimicry as a way forward for that. That's very cool. How can we, so kind of connected to what you were saying, I read an article the other day, and a lot of people are angry about it, about the first net carbon neutral McDonald's. Now this McDonald's it's made from reclaimed materials, but it's on a highway in the middle of the UK somewhere, and it uses net zero energy. And that got a lot of people very angry as to like, firstly, what exactly do these terms mean? Because these businesses are just using the terms willy-nilly, you know? And it's upsetting 10% of people that either care about it and feel something's wrong, or know about it really well and feel that there's something wrong. But 90% of people are like, okay, good job, McDonald's. And that's the danger in it, is like, because and then they're incentivized to do it again. So my question is, how can we kind of encourage a bit more substance behind these headlines?
Like I think it's just educating people about the different kind of aspects that go into when facing climate change and all the things that it brings with it. I think net zero has become like a buzzword also within policies. I think when we had the EU cooperation for government last year as a subject, I think net zero is like a thing that you want to achieve, but when you don't know the meaning behind it, then it's like kind of like, it sounds nice, but does it actually do something? And I think what you said with like near a highway, it's very big juxtaposition, I think, in my head. Because then the building itself and everything in it could be net zero, but people going there, they could not have electric cars or have gas cars, and they go there, but the people are still producing stuff. So I suppose it's isolating the problem a little bit.
Those are your scope 3 emissions. So everything that you activate and stimulate in the wider economy, like all of the petrol for stuff they have to take there. And also this is a McDonald's, not a vegan McDonald's. So most of what they sell is beef. And we all know how like hard cows burp and fart and shit, right? So it was a very kind of controversial thing, and I think something that we should be conscious of. But also like, so building off what you're saying about education, this thing that I've seen become quite common in the States, at least I've become more known to it, is this thing called SciComm. So people are SciComms. And that's just a fun way of saying science communicator. So like explaining to people different sciences, but also like why museums are important, why research institutes are important, just that general kind of getting the word out and trying to help people understand certain pieces. So my question to you guys is, how could we be, urban science communicators? How do we, what does that look like?
Well, I think that first we really have to make sure that people need to understand it. For me, it's not, like, of course you need to make people aware, but first I think we need to show why they need to become aware, because for example, some people can just like, I'm cool, but I don't care, it's not my problem. So I think it would be a good way to first demonstrate why it is important for us to become aware in those aspects of sustainability, and then from there we can build this community where we can really thrive. But yeah, I think what we really lack right now is that a lot of people they're listening but they don't care, and so we need to show people what the problem is, and doing that is hard, it's difficult. But
what are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it's very useful to be like a cause of something or an origin, and then having the effects of it. Like with our project right now from Jakarta, we're facing water problems, and really researching where they actually come from is the basis of understanding why we need to fix it, because then you have a better understanding, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay, that's interesting. I know one measure that's being kind of considered in many developed nations in Europe and the UK, I know for sure, is this thing called climate literacy. So every student, and increasingly in different industries, you have to know, like obviously in primary school, that would just be like a general understanding of like how the atmosphere works and how adding CO2 and methane has like a blanket effect and heating it up, right? Very simple. But not every high school did that. It's not on, it's not necessary on every syllabus. So a lot of communities that don't care about it don't have it, and that propagates the problem. And it hurts the vote when it comes to important decisions on a national level.
Of course.
That's one thing. And the never mind. I've lost my train of thought.
No, but you started talking about this whole thing with the vote, and that reminded me that recently, last year, I believe, in Germany, there was the vote, like people could vote again for the prime minister, the chancellor, I mean. And what they saw was that the number of people voting for the Green Party has been increasing. And that is because the younger generation is now starting to vote. And the younger generation is more, let's say, I don't want to say woke, but we're more aware that we need to make changes in the world. And so I think that what is taught in German schools, I know for my friends, for example, they're taught that they need to reduce eating meat, and they need to start recycling more. And I can say that from the younger generation in Germany as well, because my parents have friends, and those friends that have little children, and they already have a completely different mindset from the adults. And I think that is great because they're shaping the younger generation to be more sustainable. And you can already start to see that politically when people go out to vote. So I believe that.
So that was like a sneaky thing that progressives did 20 years ago. So if you're listening to this as a policymaker in some country that's not as progressive as it should be, and most aren't with regard to sustainability, and you have any say over a syllabus of any variety, you know, as a teacher or you know someone who makes decisions, then put some of this education into the heads of kids. Wait 20 years for it to mature and bake, and then you'll reap the rewards, and the vote will start to shift. So I think that's a really good example in Germany. Yeah,
and then of course maybe in the future we're going to make more changes, and they've already started to implement more policies and laws that are more sustainable. So of course in Germany I think they already shut down all of their fossil fuel power plants because they want to make energy there fully green. So of course they're implementing more wind power sources. And a lot of people are investing in solar panels.
So when Liv said this, I knew that I felt uncomfortable about it, but I didn't want to question her at the time. So I went and did some research, and my my instinct was correct. Germany is far, far from being coal independent. They still have a number of burning coal plants, but they do have a coal exit strategy that they're implementing at the moment. And part of the stress is the fact that they're closing their nuclear and coal plants at the same time. I have no comment on nuclear power in general, but so Germany's doing well, but not that well.
And another benefit to this that also comes back to the whole thing is if you produce more energy than you consume, the government can pay you back. And so it's also a try to incentive for people to install solar panels. And I think it works. If people need a benefit out of it, then why not?
But that's to me that's the way to do it. It's not like, hey, this is the problem. These are the shitstorm that we'll have in 20 years time, and this is what you must do now to change it. It's no hey, fuck the future, but if you do this in 5 years, you'll be getting paid. Or in 5 years, your kids will know. If you look on the outside of my building, there's a film. There's a grey, blacky film that if you run your finger along, you can see it's the soot from the road outside. So if I went to a mom in this building and I showed her that soot and I said, in 5 years, if you make this decision, this will no longer coat the inside of your kids' lungs. It's those right now, right here, this moment, your life type thing that I like to look for in any situation. I find them far more motivating for most people.
I think it's also building habits, especially with the younger generation, because you're noticing that it's not really surprising me that the younger generation is the most adamant about making a difference, because they feel they have the responsibility to, because you're the ones growing up now, you're the ones going to face the problem most, and hoping that adults who have learned about it and are sensible about it can inform you to the best of their ability to basically
put habits into you that it's just a given.
Yeah.
I think it's also with like when we had environmental psychology last semester, I think our lecturer really did a really good job at explaining to us that habit building can be the most influential way to change your behavior.
But breaking a habit is
That's
very difficult.
yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
Also, building on this is like parenthood.
Mm.
Because like if you have a kid, I had this conversation with a Canadian man that I met a long time ago, and he had just had a kid, and we had this long talk about it. But to summarize, what we were saying was it's easier for a kid to build these things if they have nothing to replace. Like if a kid is raised a vegetarian or vegan, they don't know what meat tastes like.
So
Sure, they might try
miss
it.
the taste.
Yeah, at 18, 20, you know, or 14, 15, if they're feeling rebellious, they might grab a steak and take a bite. And it might be nice, but it's not like part of their culture, part of their like machine, part of their like inertia of life. Like this is just the way I do things.
Yeah.
So I think it's an incredible responsibility having a kid right now, from the education and all sorts of variables. Yeah.
But then when it comes to meat consumption again, another way to make people consume less meat would be to increase meat prices.
That's as a student for me. When I noticed for some reason I do have parents that they're not wealthy, but they're just like at a comfortable amount. And I do notice when I'm handling with my own like money, I am pretty frugal with it, especially for food for some reason. So I tend to like buy chicken mostly, but I only tend to buy it once every few weeks, freeze it, and only eat it a few times. Like I've been eating mostly pasta and like other stuff. I think
everything vegetarian.
And it's just even if it's like not marketed as vegetarian and you eat it and you like it, it's just you want to eat more stuff like that. Like I like a load of flavors that are very Latin, for example. So I like all kinds of red vegetables and stuff. So as long as something has like a little bit of spice or like you and Kirsten were introducing me to sushi because I originally didn't like it, but as long as there's something spicy in it, that like stimulates instead of just coldness, then it's really nice to eat as well. So I think it's just getting used to stuff.
But it just reminded me of something. Like for example, what my mom did when I was a kid, because of course a lot of children don't like to eat greens and everything. So what my mom used to do, that I think it worked out pretty well because I love all types of vegetables and greens and reds. She would cut like paprika, tomatoes and everything, and she would leave it around the house for me when I was like around 2 years old. So I would be playing and I would find, I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna eat it. So I started eating it by myself. Like my mom didn't force me to eat it.
It was more of a like, you thought it was your idea.
Yeah, I was like, I'm doing this by myself. Like it's not my mom trying to force me. So like even when I went to school, like I would eat cucumber, paprika, and all the kids would be eating something that's super unhealthy, but I would be there eating my healthy food. And it was something that my mom did indirectly to directly influence me, and it completely worked out. And I think that's definitely a way for us to do it as well.
That's such a like interesting thing. Like if I had a friend who had a kid and they were just like leaving vegetables around the house, I'd be like, you are mental. You are just wasting food, leaving around the house. Meanwhile, there you were like behind the couch, like
exactly.
I don't really remember how it happened for me because I when I was a kid, there was like a load of kids in my street my same age. And it's very different from typical kids. We didn't used to eat sweets and stuff. We didn't used to eat crisps. But when we had like all the kids in one house and you put like carrots, tomatoes, cucumber, like all like the vegetables and fruits and like strawberries and stuff on the table, it'd be gone within no time.
That's awesome.
So I don't know how that like got started, but I used to as a kid when I was very young, and I still do. Like my dad would just buy one of those big bunches of carrots and like skin them, I don't know. Peel them. And just put them in a large container in some water in the fridge, and I'd eat it within like 2 days on my own.
Whoa.
It's just, I think it's something.
You did that?
I don't know, maybe it's just from young, because my dad himself, he grew up with a mum who didn't really know how to cook much, so she only made potatoes and stuff, and fries and mashed potatoes, and that's it. And when he met my mum, I think she introduced him to like rice and other cuisines and stuff. So in my house, I've become a very big fan of Mexican food and Italian food, just everything that's like a little bit spicy and like flavorful.
Yeah, lots of pieces.
Yeah, I'm very I don't really like Dutch food. Like you have like the stamppot, like all that. I don't know, for some reason I never really ate it a lot when I was younger, so I find it very bland compared to like Mexican cuisine and stuff.
Yeah,
I think it's just like
I wonder why that is, because like I understand stamppot from like a developing nation, right? So stamppot was developed in the Netherlands when you were like an agrarian economy, so you're just farming a lot, and then like as it developed, like you know people ate it because it's cheap and effective for calorie thing. But like, why didn't that happen in Mexico? Why does Mexico have an insane culinary? Like, why don't they just eat maize meal and mixed with kale or something? You think just climate?
I've just noticed that like I don't, for some reason, I don't like most green vegetables. Like I like them, but they have to be cut up very finely, because some like spinach and stuff is very specific, but if it's just a leaf, it's very tangly and stuff.
So
it's
I wouldn't like my spinach salad then.
No, it was like I ate it in a lasagna once as like layers of leaves. So when it's like dry, it's fine, but when it's like a little bit like mushy and stuff, I don't know about it.
I can see that. All right, we're putting it back a little bit to the sustainability topic. Recently, the price per kg of recycled plastic has doubled due to the demand. What are your thoughts on that? Give me some reflections on what that means.
I think that's good, because then people are going to start to find alternatives to it, because of course it costs a lot of money. So that's when people start to get creative and start to develop something else that's cheaper, because of course that's how people are. So I think right now that's good, because then maybe we're going to find something that's way more sustainable that we didn't know even existed. So doing that, I think it's a great way to, make people create their new stuff.
Yeah, money has always been a good incentive for people to start finding alternatives. I think when solving problems, even in like the urban environment and like with water problems and stuff, if you find a problem and you make an alternative easier, less effort, like for the people, cheaper, they start to navigate themselves towards those options, and they would like unconsciously do that rather than other behavior, I suppose.
A good example of that at the moment, the Dutch government has a plan to slowly crank up the price of gas over the next 5 years, and increase the price of electricity, but not to the same degree that gas is going up. So that it becomes financially obvious that heating with electricity makes more sense now than gas. So that's kind of like one of those policies in play.
I think it's also the Norway bit I was talking about with renewable energy and stuff. It was like a long like hour or two video from a Ukrainian guy, and he was just driving along the whole coast. And in Norway, funnily enough, there's a load of countries that produce oil a lot, like the oil giants.
Yes.
Norway produces quite a bit of oil as well.
Yes.
But they're like one of the only, and maybe the only country that hasn't reduced the price of oil just because they're producing it, like for people to use it a lot. It's still very expensive. Like Sweden, their neighbor, imports it from Norway, but it's more expensive in Norway than in Sweden. So I think like it's a very annoying Western example. But it also depends per country, I suppose, because in countries like Norway, it's expensive, but they are approaching stuff in the way you kind of should in their context.
Yeah, that is interesting. It's just like really responsible decision making.
Yeah,
like, this is the responsible thing to do as a country, and it's just like it's incredible that they've educated their populace to the point where everyone's like, this is going to hurt us, but this is responsible. Like that's the holy grail of like, my reflection on this, I think you raise a really good point that it motivates people off. Like when oil prices are higher, people always will move to other forms of energy and so on. But my initial reaction was like, this is not a good thing, because it's encouraging people to use secondhand plastic, and it's justifying like, I can buy this bottle because it's secondhand plastic, or this pair of shoes, or this t-shirt because it's made with recycled plastic. Where unlike aluminium or wood or whatever, plastic either needs to be burnt and go in the air, or it needs to get chipped up and put in the ground. Those are literally the only two options, and you can't keep recycling it because the chemical composition of plastic starts to break down over time. So it's like this really interesting thing where you think that recycling plastic is a good thing, but actually fundamentally, like in my view at least, plastic shouldn't belong. Like we shouldn't be positive about the industry at all. It's kind of like smoking, like, or the oil industry saying, like keep us around, we're going to help you solve the problem. No, just die.
I think that
just feels gross and weird, and no.
I think that's been like a thing in my family, especially with my dad. I've talked about like smoking and stuff, and he knows impacts that it's had on people's lives, and he's just not for people being like, you can decrease your smoking. He's just like, no, just shut down the factories. And I'm just like, more sustainable choice, whenever a factory decides to move place, just make them shut down. And I think from like a social perspective again, then economically as well, it's very problematic. So like, I don't know if the USA is a good like example, but I do know that at some point they do have a policy, Biden has a policy about basically getting the workers from the oil and the unsustainable industries to kind of integrate them into the new industries that are gonna lead to a sustainable future. So solar panel farms, like have workers there that can still earn the same amount of money, but then transfer them instead of into poverty or like being jobless. They can basically have training to transition into a different job that is better for the economy and better for life of humanity and as a whole, I think. So it's very like it is a thing, I would say, like stop those factories, but then from a social and an economic perspective, I have like it's a thing that people have to get around, I think, when they care about social context and stuff.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much I think we just need to respect the past in the same way that like I mean, I don't like to bring, like, this is the example that comes to mind, but like the way that the Germans treat their like Nazi history, they don't try and get rid of it. You know, they're not trying to erase the fact that they did it, especially within like German culture, as much as I understand.
Yeah.
But they respectfully put it to sleep, and we're like, no, that was a tradition we had, and now it's gone, and that idea is that the people changed.
Yeah.
But the idea and the pride and whatever, because I have a friend that works in the oil industry as an analyst, and that's his logic for staying there, and why marketing agents will work with him to put out this message is because they believe that these places are changing. They drink the Kool-Aid. Whereas I'm more skeptical. I think most of the people on the board are just happy to carry on making money as long as possible. Okay, so I've got a really good question, and I've decided I'm going to give my teachers a hard time in every podcast. So you're gonna get this every time, unfortunately, because I like this question and you angered me. So so basically what happened was, this is discussing traditions and how we should question tradition more often for sustainability in our professions and in our lives. And the specific thing that these guys are guilty of, my two wonderful lecturers, is we had a very special guest come to talk to us, very kind of high end. It was a really good talk. She it was really awesome. And at the end, we were talking about Christmas trees, because this was just before Christmas 2021. And she was saying how basically they're kind of like deforestation, and then you leave it out on the curb. Like, if you think about it a bit deeper, it's really not worth, she's like, I'm happy to live without that, really. There are convenient ways to get around it, or to like culturally shift away from it, do a plastic one for one generation and then stop, or like do a planted one, have a small planted one for your whole life.
That's what I have at home.
Yeah, there's a number of ways to get around it. And then just after that talk, she was handed what is essentially the same, which is a bundle of flowers wrapped in plastic. It's a plant that was grown for completely visual, sentimental cultural reasons, was then handed over to her, and you should have seen the disappointment in her eyes.
I think it's just, my family has had a plastic Christmas tree, the same one, for ages. I've never had a real Christmas tree. I did notice that it still leaves stuff behind, because I was hoovering the ground and I was like, damn, even if we had a real one, I would leave it behind. But I do watch some like content creators on YouTube, and they every year pick up a Christmas tree, and I'm just like, it's nice to grow it as a family, like once you have a child. But I think having one in the attic that's just plastic, I think plastic is also not a good way around it, because if you destroy the plastic, then it's just not happy.
Yeah.
Or not good for the planet either. But having one that has a life cycle of like a few generations is I think way better than having one that you chop down every year and you grow it for years and then you chop it down, and it's just this cycle, I think.
Yeah.
Or I mean, in my case, I have a very small one, and I think it's great. Like, of course, maybe you can adapt to having those huge Christmas trees. Maybe you can have a small one. You can have it in a vase. That's what I have with mine. And then once it's big enough, you can plant it outside. In Brazil, for example, we had one outside our house, and we would decorate that one outside. It's still there, So that's our Christmas tree. That was our Christmas tree every single year.
Like a planted one in the garden.
A planted one, in the garden. Yeah. So that's something that...
It works in Brazil, but maybe not so much in Europe, where it's like 2 degrees outside.
True, but...
I mean, if you're listening to this in a warm climate, it's a brilliant idea.
Yeah, that's what we did, and it worked for us. And then here as well, we did the same thing. My parents live in Germany. And we also have one there, and it just works for us, because like, of course, it's such a waste that you're gonna cut down the tree, and then of course after Christmas you see all of them piled up outside. It's like, what are they gonna do with this now?
I think those are really good suggestions, and I'd like to add as well that like, along with the Christmas tree, we can scale down like the indulgence of Christmas. So like, especially for kids, you buy them loads of junk.
Oh yeah.
Loads of junk, dude. Like metric tons of plastic I used as a kid of like toys that I then broke and got thrown out.
Yeah.
Like insane. Like unnecessary insane. So you, instead of like doing a big plastic truck, you spend quite a bit more money, but you get a quality little wooden toy or something, and it like scales with this Christmas tree down to something that like matters.
Actually, most of my toys were actually wooden ones.
That's cool.
for example, when we still lived in Brazil, my dad would sometimes come to Europe, and he used to always buy me wooden toys because my parents are all about like not having plastic ones, but like toys that actually help educate your children.
Wow.
So I had like
Your parents are like way woke.
yeah. So I think I still have some of them. Like those little puzzles, they were all wooden ones.
Oh yeah.
And then those vegetables are also wooden ones. I can chop it, and they had like a Velcro on it.
Oh yeah, I had plastic. Yeah.
No, I didn't have mine. Were not plastic. Mine were actually wooden ones. So that's something that I grew up with, and I didn't think that it was like, you know.
Yeah, you didn't miss out on anything.
No,
you were
I did
like
not.
furious that you had a wooden toy and your friend had a big plastic toy.
No.
Why can't I have a plastic toy?
No, and also something that my parents always did that I value to this day is that whenever, like, I never had a lot of toys for Christmas. I can see, like, for example, so many children that get like 5 different toys for Christmas. I used to get 1, and for me that was always enough. I never asked for more. In my family, you get 1 present for your birthday, 1 for Christmas, and that's it.
You make it matter.
Yeah. And after that, I used to always donate. So, like, for example, on my birthday, if I had a birthday party, I would get 5 toys. I would have to donate 5 toys or more. It was a minimum.
Well,
so it's always that change, because of course and of course there's some toys I didn't play with anymore. So of course
it also stopped you from like accumulating stuff and then doing that thing like every couple of years where you just get 4 or 5 garbage bags and fill it out. I think like through my childhood that probably happened every second year. Probably I did that, and you have a new generation of toys as you grow up, which is, I mean, it makes sense, but it's also really ecologically messed up. But my question is can we focus a bit more on how to question tradition? Because right now, like, I'm giving my lectureship, but this is like, how do you approach people that are doing these things that they've done that like just don't make sense if you think about it through a sustainability lens, but unnecessary because they're tradition?
I think that to break a tradition, like, to me, I think you have to show alternatives.
Okay.
And maybe show them how valuable it is to make that change. Because if you just say like, stop doing that, or just like, but it's tradition, I don't want to do that. So maybe if you show them like, look here, you can change this for this, then maybe you can like continue tradition in another way, or maybe you can stop this tradition and then start a new one that's more sustainable, for example.
I think some traditions are very materialistic sometimes as well. Like when you maybe at some point out to them that it's more important to be with other people and make a tradition like playing games or stuff, like instead of doing something that's hurtful or not sustainable, I would connect it more to the way that you bond with other people. If people have a better memory with some other like friends and family, and they do something together, or they have this one thing that they do all the time with one another, they can easily like sometimes take out materialistic things and go and do an activity that's better. Like you can maybe make a tradition.
Buy people experiences. That's one thing I started, is buying, instead of buying someone a product, you buy them an Airbnb something, you know. So that nothing ends in the landfill.
And even when I feel like when I would buy presents for friends or family, I always want it to be something that they can actually use, not something that's just there. Like if someone loves music, I'll give them something related to music that they can actually do something with.
So that's a good message there, lecturers that are listening. Let's think of alternatives. Let's find something that is also specific to the guest speaker that we're having. Because flowers is such a generic, unpersonal gift that all universities give. And I know that's the tradition, but there are better alternatives.
Maybe something local as well.
Yeah, something that they're into, or, you know, it's difficult for really sustainable people like her, like it is difficult to buy for people like that. But they're definitely, it's worth thinking about at least.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, cool. Well, I'll ask you the last question then. And this is to circle back basically to that SciComm thing, science communicator. That was basically my job here in Making Values, was talking to the younger students and just having a conversation. If you were in my position and you'd done the minor and you needed to like do this, like get this message out, start to have this conversation, how would you do it in your own personal way? Because I know that like being social is a strong suit of mine, but how would you guys have approached that?
I think I would honestly do the same.
Okay.
Because like sometimes it's good to bother people with these things because then they start to listen, like you bother them enough, like, okay, fine, I'll listen to you.
Yeah.
But then also maybe, I don't know, go into social media. A lot of teens are now on social media, so maybe bring that as well. For example, Isabella, that she used to be the head of the Green Office, she's now started the climate streamers, and she made an Instagram page, and she, you know, makes quizzes and everything just to get more people to engage with the page, for example. And I think it really works out because, like, every time I see that, I'm even more interested in just seeing what they're posting on their stories. And it's just a way, because we're always on our phones nowadays. So yeah.
I think something in like integrative, that like social media is a good thing, especially if you've built a community with people, especially from school and other educational facilities. And I think I would maybe interview like a few lecturers that I even have like a stronger relationship with. I think I would like to know their opinion about it, but that's really how you have a relationship with your
teachers.
Yeah. I think that depends on your own personal situation also.
Yeah, but it's just like starting that conversation on, you know, like, because obviously for me this is the start of like my career, and you know my life to me needs to represent some positive impact. You know, that's what matters to me. I don't care how much I die with my bank account, but you know, what kind of positive change can I make with my life? So yeah, that's kind of like, this was the answer to that question I had like 6 months ago. But yeah, thank you guys for coming in. This was a really awesome chat.
Thank you.
Really nice to have this conversation, and hopefully you guys will let this mull around in your brain and have similar conversations and make changes. I think in our like, because the built environment represents such a huge percentage of like our greenhouse emissions, we have like a disproportionate responsibility in our professional lives. Like architects choose what materials make up a building. Like they literally decide, and urban planners to some extent, because when you make an area, you can give a brief as to, okay, these buildings must use this material just so you can keep everything cohesive. And then the architect makes the rest of the decisions. But yeah, just like simply selecting the materials, like that's where the carbon, most of the carbon comes from. So yeah, we have a big responsibility to carry on working, carry on engaging, and making good decisions. Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, welcome to the third episode or podcast of my final assignment. I'm sure the first two were riveting, but this evening, is the ISD student podcast, where we will be discussing kind of the built environment, sustainability in it, and just kind of wherever the conversation goes. But just for you guys, I have a couple questions here, and I encourage you to just use it as a jumping off point. So you can ask me questions or ask each other questions, kind of let the conversation flow if you feel like that's natural. You don't have to like answer and then wait. Yeah, whatever comes to your mind, let it flow. So yeah, without further ado, if you guys don't mind introducing yourselves, where you been, where are you going, type thing.
Yeah, sounds good. Should I start? Yeah, my name is Polina Schafs. I'm originally from Berlin, and now I'm, like you said, in my third year. I just finished my first internship in Germany, and I'm now again in Breda, but soon I will start my second internship, but I'm not sure where to go yet. So it's gonna be exciting.
Tricky. That internship stress is it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah.
How about you, Jenny?
So I'm the second student here. So my name is Jenny Siku. I am also in my third year of the Breda University, and I'm half Belgian and half Czech. So I don't know why I ended up in the Netherlands, but somehow it kind of did happen, and I really like it so far. So yeah, I did my internship in Amsterdam right now, and I will continue with them again with the same company for my second internship. So yeah.
Very nice. Just different project.
Yeah.
Okay.
But same company, because it's a good one. Nice.
Well, congrats. So my first question is a bit of a bummer, but it's a fun thought experiment. It's, have you ever communicated publicly, so outside your friend group and your family group, how the climate crisis makes you feel?
So when you mean publicly talking, you mean only about the climate change, or also other projects and podcasts?
Just like, do you feel like someone who doesn't know you super well, have you had like the conversation of like, this is how it makes me feel?
Oh yeah, definitely. I think I've addressed this problem many times to whether my family or my friends. I think it's a hot topic that makes us all a bit uncertain, but I think we all have some more hope. And
cool.
Yeah, for me it was also mainly family and friends, especially friends, because we're kind of have all a similar opinion about that, and also kind of feel that we're threatened the most, because whereas our parents or many grandparents, they probably will not face the same problems and issues that we will face. So I think our generation takes it more seriously.
And how did this become important to you? Because I think everybody has a story of how it kind of slowly dawned on them that this was something to be taken seriously. How did that happen for you guys?
Good one. I actually don't really remember, because I just know that it started a few years ago, that I really tried to focus more and more about it. I think it's also that after school you kind of start to develop other interests. And after I finished school, I went 1 year abroad to the Dominican Republic. So there's also that a lot of problems that you never experience in your home country. So just, for example, I don't know, just simple as that, using plastics. They put all the groceries in like 10 plastic bags.
Yeah.
So those were like little things, but they would happen all the time. So I think that started growing my, putting my attention on that. And so I started to overthink also my behavior. And then, of course, also in the media, I think it's in the last few years it become extremely present.
For sure.
And also, like the sustainability aspect was also one factor of choosing for the studies. So I thought a lot about what could I do.
That's cool. That's interesting that you say that. Like, do you feel like the course has lived up to that sustainability element?
No.
Okay.
I think, of course, it's like a general theme, and it's kind of normal that people talk about it, but I think we miss a lot of information. It's all pretty broad, and I think you have a bigger impact when you really start working and then look also for the companies. So I think for now it's quite limited, but I hope that in future the impact can be bigger.
Okay. How about you, Jenny? How did this become important to you?
I have also similar experience as Feline, in a way that, so at first in my home country I was right after high school studying business, and I really did not enjoy it, so I kind of was trying to find my way, and then I ended up finding this very nice minor, which was the environmental art class, and I had this amazing teacher that actually taught me a lot about climate change and how artists actually try to make it try to make people more alarmed about the problem, and because I've always been more drawn to art, so I thought it was a really nice combination of it, and that led me actually to volunteer in Costa Rica, so also Central America, and there I was really looking forward to take care and save the turtles, but at the same time in the daytime we were like cleaning up the beaches, and when it's been every day like 4-hour cleaning up of the beach, and it's really never ending, so that really shows you there's something wrong with the world. Like, it could have been from small cups or forks, plastic forks, to like big car wheels, and so much other bunch of trash. So that was really something alarming to see, and this is how I kind of end up in Breda, trying to do something with the environment, but in a more architecture way. I don't know.
So you were talking about like plastic on the beaches. Like, that's a good example of like a primary effect of pollution, especially like on the biosphere. My next question is, what do you guys think will be some of the city stresses that you'll start to see from climate change? Some of the effects you'll start to see, maybe you've already seen in your home city, or you expect to see in the next like 5 years?
I think, well, to be honest, Europe is pretty lucky. I mean, we're the last people who probably experienced like really the big effects and threats. But I mean, we also see now a temperature rise, and that we have droughts, and also in Germany just last year there was a huge flooding, so those problems will continue to rise more frequently. And there's just so much. We will also probably will experience shortage in food. The biodiversity is going to be reduced more and more, although it already is.
Yeah.
So also in cities, I think it's going to be quite hot, because we're just lacking in trees, like natural shadow.
Shading, yeah.
But yeah, there will be so much more.
Yeah, it's going to be, but I mean, it's exciting, it's terrifying, but also exciting, because if you're the one who's thought about it, and you know what to do, you've been aware, then when that problem happens, you can be the one kind of spearheading the change and making it happen. On the bright side.
Yeah, but where to start, because it's just such a big problem. And
yeah. I think for sure. How about you, Jay?
Yeah, there's like so much happening everywhere with the human waste and also plastic waste and everything. So I don't know. Maybe we can talk about it later.
Well,
If you had
let's like I think we all understand the problems really badly, but let's focus a bit more on the solutions. You guys are third year, so I can press a bit harder than the second years. What we talk about plastics in urban spaces and stuff. What are some of the solutions that we can design and plan? What are some of the changes that we can oversee?
Well, I think for plastic it's a little bit more difficult because the use of plastic is not really happening in the built environment. I mean, of course, plastic is also part of when building new things. But I think the main problem is the polluting and people pollute. So I think the best way of trying to reduce the pollution is to offer enough garbage bins where you can put the plastic in the right bin, for example. But good question.
I think one of the our trimester's main topic is energy transitioning. So how we've basically learned how to be more how to use energy and electricity less at home and trying to be more conscious about it. So that's something I think is if every country in the world will have that as a goal, then maybe perhaps there's going to be less pollution and less I don't know.
There's one solution I'd like to share with you and get your thoughts on, like critical thinking. Recently, Breda has installed at the end of the Mark, so the Mark flows through our city and then out the north of the city. And just outside the ring, they've installed a plastic catcher, on rivers, where they have like a line of buoys and it funnels all the plastic into one area, gets collected. What are your thoughts on that on a city level?
I think any initiative is a good start. I know this this project has been made especially for the big waste, the big trash in the ocean because of the new continent of trash happening right now, the creation of it because of all of the trash. So I think if it's applicable in a city scale, that's also a good start to know at least how much trash is being released from the water flow and stuff like that. So yeah.
It really reminded me of the lab in Jakarta because my group was focusing on cleaning the river. And we also thought about nets, but also like a bubble barrier that would create bubbles and then the plastic would go to the surface and then you can catch it. So I think it's a good idea. However, it's really a solution for the microplastics. So those are really hard to filter. But I think for the big plastic things, it's the first step.
I think also, so I'm not a fan of propagating plastic. I think a lot of these like recycling plastic and collecting plastic and everything kind of propagates something that fundamentally is flawed because plastic degrades chemically over time. So either way, you either have to put it in the ground or you have to burn it and put it in the air. That's how plastic ends. It's not like aluminium that has complete, there is no chemical degradation over time. But it does, in my opinion, it has value because you can show people the waste that's flowing out of their city, and then maybe that will cause more like awareness and concern, just for people to literally see the probably tons of plastic that the city releases every year. So it's kind of an all-way element to it. Cool.
Well, you mentioned the microplastics, right? So do you have any solutions in mind for that, or how can we battle that issue?
Yeah. Most microplastics come from products, so they're deliberately put in products, except for in the ocean. So in rivers, they come from products, but in the ocean, they grate against sand and they grate against each other, these bigger chunks of plastic, and that's how the plastic size gets smaller and smaller. So for the city level, I would just say like leveling a tax or banning products. It's the same as CFCs. It's a thing that's fairly easy to exclude from products. So yeah, on a city level, that would be my kind of what I would advocate for. But yeah, it's also an interesting problem. You guys recently finished your first internships. I'm curious, did you see any bad design, sustainability-wise?
Within the company, or?
Yeah, so you guys were creating and felicitating and researching and stuff, and I'm sure you guys came across a lot of material that they made. Was any of it that you stopped and went, this is really dumb, and we should not be making this? Or did that not happen? bearing in mind that I don't think either of you have said on the podcast, and if you have, I'll mute it. Exactly where you were.
I don't know, for me it was more about, like, the main focus was to create regional development strategies. So they try to create a holistic approach in how to improve a certain area. So sustainability was not always a factor, and I mean, of course it was kept in mind, but it was not the focus. But I don't remember any example where I would say, like, this is a no-go, why would you do that? Yeah,
this is really not clever, which happens a lot. Like, I think you'll see it as you progress in your careers. You'll come across work where you're like, this person or this municipality is 100% doing it for the money, and they don't give a shit. But how about you, Jen? Can you think of anything that didn't make much sense?
Well, that's very hard to say, since my company was one of the main focus was having a nice plan for the future, and sustainability was a key point of their projects. But my contribution to them was mostly in the beginning phase, so we didn't really design yet like the final outcome. It was mostly like planning a whole neighborhood of like 8 super blocks. So it was like, what I really liked, one of the main point of the plan was that they tried to make it car free, at least within the block. So that's contributing to having less pollution. So I think that's a good start, because I guess the main plan for the future is to use cars as less as possible. But something bad, it's I cannot really think of anything, especially because I will be continuing with the same company later. Yeah. So
well, I'll rattle off some of the more common ones. Was it on a brownfield site or a greenfield site? So in other words, had it been built on before, or was it a fresh build?
The projects I've worked on were already like on places that, they're retransforming the area. So basically, one is a transformation of an old factory. So I think that kind of makes sense. Trying to be sustainable in a way.
Because I think the majority of new homes in the Netherlands are being built on greenfield sites. I feel like not enough people know that they're literally just expanding into the next field, and don't necessarily have to. And then the other question to consider, was it single family homes, or was there some density to these plans, do you think?
Oh, sorry, could you repeat the question?
The concept that you guys created for these super blocks, did it have did it have high density, or was it just single homes?
Yeah, it was meant to accommodate a lot of a high number of people. And I cannot really tell much about the project since it's confidential. But,
fair enough. No, that's okay. That's okay. They've ticked my boxes.
Yeah, sorry, but it's a nice.
No, it's okay.
What I can say is that it was a nice plan for trying to accommodate all the people that are currently not having any place to live.
Nice.
So yeah.
Okay, so my next question is, there's this thing called SciComm that is quite popular in the States, but I think could be quite interesting for us as urban professionals. SciComm is just science communicator. And this is a profession in the States where people talk to the public and they just explain how science works, but also why it's valuable to have research institutes and museums and stuff. And my question is, how could we be better urban science communicators? Because I feel like a lot of what we do depends on the public voting, and the public voting depends on what they know and how they feel. So address the root cause.
I think one part is also to be more present in the media, all kinds of it, like the newspaper, but also like, let's say, Instagram. I think especially for young people. I mean, it's a theme that almost everyone is interested because it's just their living environment, so they feel part of it. But I think a lot of people just don't think about it, so they need someone from outside to, tell them, hey, this is really interesting and also concerns you. So yeah, I think the interest is there.
Okay.
Just the attention.
And do you think it's better right now to be focusing on what we think as the fundamentals, like recycling and stuff, or would you prefer to see some slightly more radical action? For example, my next question was, how do we expose as many people as possible to kind of out of the box ideas? For example, there's one method of building walls for buildings, especially if it's not tall buildings, but like 2-3 stories, where it's literally stacking hay bales, and then you put cob, which is a mix of sand, clay, and straw again, and then you put lime on the outside to seal it. So that is a natural, nature-based solution for a wall, and it has incredibly low carbon intensity and an incredible insulating value because you have a hole, So how do we get people into spaces like that? If you were a council member and I came to you with this problem and you had a budget, what would your solution be?
Yeah, I agree. I think it's been now since, ever, at least I'm 22, so I feel like the problem has always been since I exist. And we always talk about making changes, but they feel so slow. And I think some radical changes would be a nice thing, since I think right now we're kind of losing the focus on the climate change and global warming and stuff like that comparing to the coronavirus. So it would be nice if we kind of like shifted and towards the climate change issues and have radical changes. So if we get to have a budget, as you said, to basically invest in I've heard about lots of, for example, when building new housing solutions, that now some companies are using this smart tech, basically like printing a type of concrete, which is, I think, by 60% less heavy than the normal concrete. And so, for example, in the Netherlands, where kind of like the ground level being really sensitive because of the water, so I guess that's why we have to be careful for not having too much heavy buildings in order to make them sink, right?
Yeah.
So if that's one of the solutions to look for, and at least when it comes to urban planning and urban design.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting.
I think it would also be important to make them interesting to, of course, you will have some target groups that would live there if it's like, you just mentioned it with the new material. But I think you need something like a unique selling point of something that attracts people. And I think especially flexible housing or adaptive housing is a good point that really focuses on the needs of the people who will live in it. So maybe if you find a way to get people to live there, you need to first catch trend with.
Yeah. Do you know what, just inspired from listening to you guys talk, maybe a good idea, during the Middle Ages, the shift from, at least in my opinion, I have nothing to back this up, but I think the timelines make sense. The shift from wooden buildings to brick buildings correlate to grand like cathedrals. And my idea there is that there was this grand proof of concept. So these people that had always lived in wooden homes, who thought like stacking stone on top of each other, that sounds dangerous. That doesn't sound like a home, that sounds like a cave. But then they went to these really grand examples of what we think of today as construction, putting these hard materials on top of each other, and then thought, okay, I mean, if it can work like that, it can work as a house. So maybe doing a cathedral out of hay bales and just showing the like grandness of that material could be exciting.
Definitely.
It's evolution, so we have to believe in it.
Yeah, early adopters to start because that's a problem I think with nowadays is you have early adopters, but because they're private owners, I mean the internet helps with YouTube. You can go and see these people living like this, but it's not like a church that's in the middle of town that everybody crosses. It's someone's property, and you have to search it out online to find it. So yeah, it's an interesting problem. The value that I wanted to bring with this minor was starting the conversation with younger ISD people, because I feel like our course hasn't addressed this enough. That was kind of my goal. And I did it I was going to do it through filmmaking, but I decided on podcasts instead. And that's mostly because I'm strong socially. So that's how I decided to do it. But how would you guys go about communicating to younger people about sustainability and how to engage with it professionally? What would be your personal take on the problem?
To be honest, I think, social media.
Okay.
Although I don't really like social media too much because it has also negative effects, definitely. But I think, of course, because just all the young people, almost all the young people are on social media, and it's not, a good way to, reach out to them. So if you also find a format that they will like and that they also think, oh, that's really interesting, then I think that's already a great step.
I agree, social media, but I also love to listen to some podcasts because I am a lot on Spotify, so that's also working for me. But also, I was thinking of like a daily thing you would find out about it in your daily habits. So like, for example, when you go make your groceries could be also an option. Like you have some like podcast in the grocery store or something.
Yeah. I think we'll see that in the next 5 years. I know that like you guys, have you noticed that there are like those health labels starting to pop up on all the products in the grocery store, the like ABCD thing?
Yeah.
So that's what's happened recently. But I think that more and more you'll see companies advertise how they are low CO2 grams, and then you can go to a store and you can compare this product and this product, and you can be like, okay, I know I can make an informed decision now. I'm not guessing anymore.
Oatly does it.
Yeah, Oatly does do it. So that could be an exciting way to make better decisions. And then finally, to circle back to a question I asked before about bad design, you guys will come across bad design and people that use the words very hollow. You know, they say these words, but they don't understand them. They're just trying to milk the marketing element of it. So I want to challenge you now, maybe what do you guys think about ways that you would approach dealing with that situation, trying to talk down the bad design or trying to like have that conversation with that person, because someone has to.
Yeah, I think approaching the person and start a conversation is always the first step. And also offer alternatives. But for that, you also need to be prepared and have like the numbers, and like you need to have a good reason. And also criticizing is easy, but changing it is the hard thing. So
providing a more legitimate solution.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's always good to have an alternative design proposal. So like you're not surprised when they ask you how would you do it differently. But I like greenwashing, like the effect of putting just a bit of greenery in some building just to make it look a bit more healthy and sustainable is definitely bad design. So always look for like the energy consumption of the building, like how like would it interact, like also if there's a strong community that could like have like community gardens and stuff like that. I think it's part of the solutions. And having a bad design, unfortunately, is in between having strong stakeholders and big clients. So you have to always kind of like, make it.
I think your point about community is really strong as well, especially if you have the right target market. So if you are designing if you're designing for wealthy people, then they're going to ask you for what they think value looks like. They've been taught that these shiny boxes and these smart cars is what wealth looks like. But if you're designing for people who can't afford to keep a car running all the time because, you know, it's been made deliberately expensive, then, you know, if you just pull the, like say, hey, lead designer, look at this community. Why are you putting these roads all through this space when, you know, these people are going to struggle to keep their cars running all the time? Wouldn't you consider adapting the plan to suit that maybe?
I actually have a little bit of the feeling that it also depends on where you work.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I have the feeling that, especially in architecture, the architect wants to make the building about art or himself or herself.
Yes.
Not really for the people. Whereas I think, or I have the impression that for spatial planners, it's more about the people, and they have a different view. Of course, they're great architects, which really build great buildings for the people.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of examples where the building is just not livable.
Yeah. That's such a good that's such a good point. So people building with their ego, that's something that like I think we're all trying to shift away from. I know this one designer who says, not only should I not design for myself, I shouldn't design for my clients, but I should design for my client's ancestor and my client's great grandkid. So that's where he looks at. He's like, okay, I understand your needs, but I need to know where you come from, you know, where this space comes from, what's the heritage of the space. So I can honor that, but also I can honor what your great grandkids will need. You know, I can create a space that is adaptable, that doesn't need to get torn down and redone by your grandkids or whatever. So that's an interesting point.
Yeah, but actually it's also quite weird because nowadays buildings are built for 30 years?
Yeah.
So it's not even one generation.
Yeah. And the same designer, he has quite a radical approach to things. He has this podcast I was listening to the other day, and he was saying how there was this one tribe that would tear down their town every 25 years. And he was like fascinated by this, and he spent like 15 years trying to find the answer as to why they did this. And eventually he figured it out. This community of people who built in a certain way, they tore down their houses and their public buildings because they needed the next generation to learn how to do it. And also they were using biodegradable materials. So after 25 years, the material starts to degrade to the point where you should probably replace it. But that's such a beautiful thing. It's like your kids get to a certain age, so you tear everything apart and you create new with them in mind, and they learn, and then they can look forward to doing the same with their kids, and every generation has this experience.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
So temporary building doesn't have to be awful. Granted, it would be nice if our buildings lasted thousands of years, but you know, if you do temporary the right way, it could be positive.
It's a good concept that should be maybe taken in consideration for some big projects.
Yeah. Can you imagine that, like applying that to our life? Can you imagine we had high school, then a gap year, then university, then worked for 4 or 5 years, and then there was just this year that everyone had a name for, and that was when you went home to your family with your parents who were like now roughly, you know, 50, 55, 60, kind of getting out of like physical work age, and you like rip it apart with them and create your, you know, they will live there too, but then like your home. It's like this interesting dynamic to try and introduce. It would be crazy.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, guys, thank you for having this chat. I don't know if you guys have any questions for each other or for me. Yeah.
Actually, I do have one.
Yeah, sure.
Because I would like to hear your opinions on what do you think is better to take a step back and use less technical devices, less electricity, or to use smart mobility and smart devices in order to reduce the CO2 emissions, for example, or to improve the living situation.
That's a really, really good question, because both lead to the same thing. You have a lot of companies promising innovation. Innovation will save us. Innovation will get us to where we need to be to, you know, get below 1.5. And then there's another group of people, the people that will go into the hills and farm and live in their beautiful little yurts their whole life. And they're like, no, the answer is turning back the clock and living simpler lives. My preferred method, my ideal solar punk city, is a blend of the two. So where possible, the materials are incredibly biodegradable and integrated into the ecosystem in an intelligent way, but at the same time to maximize economies of scale. You know, you can still have like smart buses running between these like all wooden towers that grow green, and you know, solar panels can still be a thing, because if we do go back in time, we lose our standard of living. You know, your like mortality rate of infants will start to go down again, because we're no longer creating, you know, the computers that monitored, you know, pregnant ladies' health and so on. So I don't think you can sell that idea fully, but I think where it matters, we keep the tech and we make it insanely advanced, and where it doesn't need to be, we get rid of it and we live, you know, we ride around on bikes instead of driving around in Teslas type thing. Yeah. But yeah, thank you for your question.
That's interesting.
Yeah. Anyways, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate your time, and hopefully this has sparked a thought in your mind, and you can have similar conversations with people, and together we can kind of slowly pull hard on the wheel of this ship that's heading towards an iceberg, and at least then we can tell our grandkids that we did what we could. That's kind of my I'm a bit of a fatalist as well. I know that like this podcast started a bit fatalist, and I'm a fatalist too. I don't think we have what it takes. I think it'll be quite dramatically different in 100 years time, but I just think it's art at this point. What we do now, it's poetry. How we behave as professionals. We know we're going to die. It's kind of like on the Titanic, man. It's going down, but fuck, I'm in the band and I'm going to carry on playing. I'm going to play my heart out, so that, you know, so if ever someone reads a history book, they'll know that the band carried on playing even as the ship was going down. So it's kind of bittersweet that way. Anyway, thank you guys. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having us too.
Yeah, thank you for
It's really nice to explore some of the ideas.
Hello and welcome to the fourth and final podcast. Hey?
Already?
Yeah, it is.
All right.
Yeah, all right, let's do that again. Hello and welcome to the fourth and final podcast. If you're upset that this has taken 4 hours instead of the 1 hour that I promised at the start of this video, then you didn't click away and you've got this far, so my plan worked. Thank you for joining us for this last podcast. This is the ISD 4 students, so there's 3 of us here, including myself. I'll be a little more engaged with this conversation than the others. I have Rianne Van Zetten.
Hello.
And I have Quincy Quist.
Hello.
So yeah, this will be our final episode, and I'll be trying to press these guys a little harder than I did the younger students, and hopefully they stand up to the test a little better.
I hope so too.
Yeah. So
So
yeah, without further ado, do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I'll start. So I'm Rianne Van Zetten. I'm a 4th year student at the ISD course. I'm from the Netherlands. I am Dutch. I'm not that old.
Tends to be how that works.
Yeah,
I'm from the Netherlands, I'm Dutch.
So 22 years old. And yeah, that's it.
Cool.
All right, I'm Quincy. I'm also from the Netherlands, but I don't live there. I live in Austria right now. I'm 25 years old, and I'm also currently still technically an ISD student, although I don't think I've been on campus for like 2 years at this point. But yeah, I also study ISD, and I should graduate this year, just like you guys.
Nice.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, thanks for joining me, guys. I really appreciate you taking the time, traveling so far. So I start the episodes with the same question, the same two questions. And the first question is, have you ever kind of communicated publicly, so outside your friend or family group, how you feel about the climate crisis? Have you ever spoken to anyone outside those groups?
The only two times I can remember, that was a while ago. That was like in my primary school, like when everyone was presenting about their homesteads, I was presenting about climate change, and that was like, to me, a really big deal. And I remember most people kind of, not too interested, you know, and I felt like the world was burning.
Yeah.
That was the first moment.
So education played a big role in your understanding and like coming to realize that this is a problem.
The thing is, it never was educated that much.
Okay.
Like it was more an interest.
Okay.
Than from I did a presentation on school, but it wasn't from school.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
How about you, Quincy?
Well, coincidentally, I had an exam on climate change today. A big presentation where we had to talk about different ways to approach the problem of climate change and the problem of measures against climate change. And this whole course that I had on climate change was, according to the guy, but he's got like a PhD and everything in climate science, but according to him, it was very basic. To most people in the course, it was quite difficult to follow sometimes. But still, like to learn in the course climate change and then see how people talk about it in society, it's two different worlds. Like people are not even able to tell apart weather and climate still, you know.
Yeah.
And that's to me the worrying part about climate change is not necessarily that we cannot come up with like the technology or the means to solve it, but that we like cannot convince the people of the need to actually do something about it.
Yeah.
I feel.
I'm not the best debater, so I try not to publicly engage with these type of things. But I think that's
I feel very, very similar. Like even if people are aware of the change and want to be proactive, they still, for instance, we had the flooding of I think the Meuse River. It was beginning this year in the summer, and even though that impacted so many people negatively, still there are plans being drafted today that build in the exact spot or even in a more vulnerable spot for flooding along the Meuse, even though it has been proved it floods and it floods quite bad. That still people are building there, and then they'll say, but it'll be climate resilient. But it isn't. You're building on a spot you shouldn't be building.
I think it's human nature to live in areas that are risky, that are along riverbeds. Maybe the ground historically has always been a bit more fertile because of the incoming and outgoing water or that kind of things. But last month I was in Naples in Italy, and that's like right next to pretty like dangerous, well-known dangerous volcano. And it could very well be that when that volcano erupts, 3 million people are going to be like affected by that.
Yeah.
People still decide to live there because apparently there's some benefit to it.
Yeah.
So I don't think people don't want to listen to that. I think it's just people are not able to comprehend that amount of discomfort. So
yeah, they can't imagine that city not existing
until it does happen.
Or even when it does happen, like you say, in that area that
it,
flooded,
yeah.
You move back in, you rebuild, you carry on.
Yeah. And I think rivers is especially tricky because people move towards rivers because it was a great infrastructural position
back in the day.
But that was when the rivers were still flowing freely.
Right.
And there aren't anymore. And that's just causing bigger damage and bigger danger to flooding.
Yeah. So, I mean, building off that, you guys both come from fairly major cities in the Netherlands. Are there any city stresses that you've noticed in the last 5 years, or you expect to see in the next 5 years in your cities? Quincy, you can answer for Austria if you like. Are there any things you expect
Austria.
to see change?
I didn't really get the question. No.
So, for example, there was one example of how last year, I think it was, one of the horses in Prague died. because the heat got too high. So this cultural tradition that they have of having horses pull the carts, very kind of ingrained in their culture, is becoming no longer possible during certain times because the animals are just going to start to die. So that's an example of a stress that the city is facing that will change things.
Well, in that regard, where I currently live in Austria, in Kapfenberg, small town, like 25,000 people or something. It's got a major steel producer called Böhler. It's a really big steel company. I think they produce worldwide. Steel worldwide, and they're pretty well known. And the town is pretty dependent on that factory. Like without that factory, the town wouldn't really amount to anything. Like this factory basically owns this town to an extent. It provides job, it provides housing, and of course, money. So making steel is not the most environmentally, sustainable thing that we do as a species. So putting restrictions on that would mean for this town that a lot of people's livelihoods would disappear. That's a difficult concept for people to say, like, hey, we might have to do something about your livelihoods that might negatively affect you.
Yeah.
It's a hard setting.
And that would lead, that's kind of a form of climate migration, right? As the restrictions get tighter and tighter, we start locking down these industries. It's not only people directly affected by the heat or the drought, it's also the people affected by industries shutting down and having to move across countries.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I was also involved in that last year in Slovenia, in the national park, to think about how to facilitate sustainable tourism inside a national park. But also how sustainability plays into the lives of people that actually live there. So sustainable also has to mean that the people that live there are not interrupted by tourism or by too much by the restrictions that are put on tourism, because they still have to make a living as well off of that, for example. Yeah. So sustainability goes further into thinking also about socio-economic terms and how it affects people economically and socially.
Yeah.
At least that's what I learned there.
How about you, Ryan? Any changes you expect?
The first thing that comes to mind is not that interesting necessarily, but what we have been seeing in the Netherlands, which I read about this week, is that with the climate change and especially the droughts that we're experiencing during the summer season, and the increasing heat, we have an increase of fire risk. And that's often something that we don't think about with climate change, is an increased level of fire risk, especially along rails or highways, where you have a lot of metal objects that heat up and concrete that can heat up, which makes the area around it more vulnerable to fires. And I remember last year sitting in a train, riding through fire, as this was happening in a place which was designed for it, basically.
Right.
That's one of the first things. Fire hazards are also therefore more included each year in urban master plans for cities.
Right.
Where certain areas are becoming more and more.
Which is another good example of restrictions getting tighter because of climate change. These pressures that are pressing on us is, again, that's another way that it's changing how we can and where we can live.
Yeah. If we're not including the climate change and the predicted climate variance, then we're not making sustainable cities either.
All right, so guys, let's say that you're in work and somebody is proposing something, or there's a plan that's been drawn up, and it's really it's not working out for you in terms of sustainability. This is a two-parter. Firstly, how do you question authority when it comes to poor design? Because often you get people in positions of power that have these strong opinions about things and the way they should be and the way they've always been. So how do you question that? And then the second part is, what are the elements you would look at first to kind of change the narrative on this urban space that doesn't make sense to you?
That's an interesting question.
I can go first.
I think it also would depend on where I worked. I think in the Netherlands I'd feel much more comfortable just standing up to authority than here in Austria, where just when I came in for my interview here for my internship, I had to go in a suit and stuff. That's expected of you here. So the gap in formality between Austria and the Netherlands is quite a bit larger. And I think I would still try to give my perspective on it, because that's what you would be paid to do in a way, I suppose. And the things I would look at, Well, it also depends on what the plan is for, because I'll be working for a mobility company, so I don't think they would already be very eager to just build roads and stuff, because that's not the type of company I'll be working for. I would definitely also look at how it impacts the people already that have to live in those areas.
Okay.
And how it impacts livability of a city.
Nice.
So if he does want to build, I don't know, just say something weird like a big bike path, it's still a sizable piece of infrastructure, or a bike highway. You still have to look if there are any noticeable downsides to that before approving such a plan.
Nice.
Even if building a bike path already sounds like a good idea compared to building a car road.
Yeah. I think this one speaks a little bit more personally to me too. I have a few situations in which it exactly happened. The difficult thing is when you are working for someone that has a strong opinion and wants things to go a certain way, there's only so much you can advise and argumentate to what a person is willing to hear. And in my situation, that meant no matter how good the argumentation is, it's just not being listened to. And for instance, in this case, it will lead for me leaving, because there's no need. I don't want to be in a company that just supports continuous development without thinking twice about sustainability. And even if the argumentation is there, all the knowledge is within the company, because I truly believe that there's enough knowledge within people working for the company to make a difference and to get very sustainable designs, like low impact designs that make sense in the area. If the person that you're working for doesn't want to listen, it's most likely not going to work.
Yeah.
And you can argumentate and you should fight for it.
Yeah.
But if it's on a certain moment a lost cause, you have to choose to leave, especially in a job.
Yeah.
I think if you're fighting against a project, for instance, the municipalities, like we wanted to propose this urban planning, you're a citizen, you can demonstrate, fight, you can really express yourself. But in a company situation, you're still dependent.
Yeah. I purchased stock in a carbon offset company on behalf of my mom for Christmas, and she feels 100% validated now. Later this year, she's flying to Europe and going on a cruise. She feels like she has offset her carbon with complete reverence in her voice. She was very pleased that 200 euros had covered the environmental damage of what she was about to do. And I didn't have the heart to break it to her that
the truth is it's good.
Probably more like 2.2 grand rather than just 0.2 grand.
It's good that she is happy about it, so she does feel like it's
cares.
A good thing to do, but money-wise, it's off.
Yeah.
I feel like people still value a product and convenience more than impact, and I think that's something that just needs to shift.
How? Because it's easy to say this is what needs to change. It's much harder to discuss how.
Yes, we are so far away from the impact of what we're doing that it's extremely hard to understand that we shouldn't. If I buy something and then tomorrow I'm gonna get flooded because I bought it, it's really stupid to say it this way. But then you maybe think twice.
Yeah.
But right now it's like I buy this and someone else somewhere else may get harmed by it.
Yeah, or like your grandkids.
Yeah.
So you're saying the goal is to make things more immediate for people.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how you do it.
Yeah.
Just make the effects immediate for people.
Yeah, make it clear.
What do you think, Quincy?
Well, I would say, it's really hard within our current society where money is everything, basically. Everything runs on money. But we should start to look at other indicators of well-being other than just financial growth and the growth of the GDP and the line goes up kind of thing. We need to think of well-being in terms of livability, survivability, and in terms of community and cohesion, and not just in those terms that everything has got to turn a profit, because that's what got us into this mess in the first place, in my opinion.
And how do we translate that into the built environment? So I really love what you're saying, that money and income shouldn't be how we value things and shouldn't be how we value wealth. But how does that move into our cities?
Well, but I've always been really interested in, and what I also want to study, sustainable regional or urban development. That is what I'm interested in for my master's.
Okay.
And in that sense, I really think that returning to some sort of more decentralized economical system where people are able to provide more for themselves on a local scale, like teach people how to have a little garden with their own vegetables and those type of things. So it's more small scale, community oriented sources of food and that kind of thing. So local economies basically.
A possible example of this that I'd like to get both of yours take on this is this 4-day work week that I read the other day that's kind of gaining popularity, but not huge. I think it's been around for a long time. But basically the idea is so you go there 4 days a week, but you're expected to keep your productivity at 100% the whole time, and you don't lose any of your pay. So the pay remains the same. You go in 4 days a week, but you have to keep your productivity at 100% the whole time. And the idea is that your productivity on average is higher then.
I do believe in that, yeah.
As someone who's got ADHD, that sounds like a nightmare.
Okay.
I don't know. For me, that wouldn't work. Like, I really need to be able to work at my own pace.
Okay, but do you see that like as a society? Does that fit into what you're saying?
Yeah, maybe in the broader society, yeah. But for me, like I'm able to be productive maybe 4 or 5 hours on one day and like half an hour on the other, and it's like very difficult for me, especially when I forget to take my medication or I'm on the wrong medication and like I don't know. So,
but it maybe it's flexible. Maybe it's just a principle that you could follow, but not necessarily a requirement. Yeah. And I do think the thing is, I feel like we're maxing out. Like, you know, when you work as much as you can, you get as much money as you can, then what you do is you supplement with all these materialistic things and you try to max out what you can get.
Yeah.
But actually that like strive to get more and more and more is like slowly like changing the way you live. And I think if we step back and we appreciate smaller, for instance, same with living, like our housing crisis wouldn't be a crisis if everyone would live in a respectable space instead of a 150 square meter house with 2 people.
Yeah.
You don't need it. You genuinely don't need it. And that means also if you don't need that, then you also don't need to work 5 days a week to provide for it.
Yeah. You're not building these lifestyles of consumerism that then require so much work to maintain.
Yeah. And I feel like the moment you are not working 5 days a week, you have to supplement less to feel emotionally happy. Many people use like they're buying their money,
spending power.
Yeah, spending power on buying happiness.
Yeah.
And I think that comes from the fact you're working so hard to earn that money, but in that time you could also just have been happy or peaceful.
Yeah, but that idea is anti-capitalist at its heart.
It probably, it is. But the thing is, I don't believe in the fact that the more you have, the more you have to work for it makes happiness. I think it's the opposite way around. There's a balance. Obviously, you shouldn't be earning nothing, and you should have a house, but just simple things.
And also, like, to be fair, Europe has made this fairly easy. I mean, I can work 20 hours a week, maybe a bit less, doing Deliveroo, and I can provide for rent and food. So, and that's before my degrees and whatever. So I wonder why more people don't work 3 days a week and then just embrace whatever else they choose as valuable.
It was a harder challenge than normal.
Like I also work Deliveroo, like Uber Eats. That's something I probably plan to do on the side of whatever I'm doing, like forever. It's just really nice to be like out and bike and do something and make a bit of extra money.
Yeah.
But then you do it because you like doing it and not to make money.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true.
While we're on this topic, I think these are already normal things to say within our little like bubble of like, I don't know, like I guess I would say higher educated people. But I don't know, like if you go on a slight tangent, for example, if you see what kids these days are into, what type of people they look up to, like for example, the biggest YouTubers these days, like Mr. Beat and Jake Paul and stuff, like these are people that sell materialism.
Yeah.
They sell like, oh, you have to do this, and next year you can buy a Lamborghini and a giant mansion, and you can date the hottest models. Like that's still the majority of like the thought and the people out there, especially children, still these days. So it is a concept that like we understand, but that we also have to be able to bring across towards the society at large.
Yeah. So I think like we need to be representatives of the alternative, right? I don't think we'll do super well, but it's still important that we try.
This is also something that kind of coincides with midlife crisis, which I read the other day, where people have this, they reach this very stable point in their life, often around the 30s, 35, 40s, depending on whether you're early or late. And then they stand still and they look back, they have reached that stability, and then they have nothing to look forward for. They look, and basically at that point, the only thing they see is like, okay, my body's going to degrade, my mind's going to degrade, death is coming.
Yes.
And that's often why many people go into midlife crisis.
Okay.
Whereas many people in like that do struggle and do have to go through like this not stable lifestyle don't experience midlife crisis, because they're constantly trying to fine tune but also let go. And it's like this play towards somewhat of a balance, but never reaching that balance.
Yeah, that's kind of the curse. The curse in the developed world is you have too much time to think. The fear of survival is not keeping your mind occupied.
Yeah, and the worst is it's degrading your mental health rapidly.
Yeah,
so that stability that you thought will just hit back because it balances itself out.
All right, guys. Well, we're coming towards the end there. I want to drop another topic in the barrel now. This one's interesting. Let's explore the connection between sustainability, urban living, and the metaverse.
Metaverse.
And the metaverse. So the metaverse, for the less alleged, is basically this concept of the third version of the internet or the web. And that means a lot of what we do, a lot of our interactions get moved from the physical world into this virtual reality world or augmented reality world. A lot more transaction, social, financial, everything will happen in this metaverse space. And the advocates say that it will bring the world closer together. It'll help against discrimination. It's more democratic because it'll give more people access, apparently. But obviously it has a bunch of flaws. But how do you think it relates to urbanism and sustainability?
Well, first of all, I don't think a metaverse would be a good idea as long as it's ran by someone like Mark Zuckerberg or any other billionaire. So, but just the idea of a metaverse where people can meet up, quote unquote, in person but online. I think it would help, like also what we see currently with the working at home, that people do want to stay at home more often and not travel into the office as much.
Yeah.
Will have an effect on, for example, congestion and on the amount of CO2 maybe emissioned.
Yes.
Yeah, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
The amount of emitted from cars, from going on the highway, people commuting, So already, if you provide even a better setting for such a work-at-home situation, then I think it will definitely have an impact on how we are forced to think about planning. Like we will not necessarily have to plan residential close to jobs anymore. For example, you can just plan in a different way.
That's interesting. This mixed use.
It's more difficult to visualize that for me. Like I'm not sure what it would exactly look like, but we'll definitely start planning for different things and for different needs once we have such a metaverse.
That makes a lot of sense.
It's similar to how, for instance, especially lockdown has influenced many stores to close, and city centers are, especially the lowest level, the ground level of stores where normally would be a shop, are also turning into houses. So our city centers will, if more goes online, and especially if a metaverse allows you to do that in more virtual reality, and especially the shopping, if that probably will be an option, then that will change our real life city centers a lot. Like there will be, the structure will be completely different, the functions will change. But I also feel like if a metaverse, it depends obviously where it will go, it will change the drive for people to have a nice city space, urban space.
Okay.
Because if you can supplement the way we supplement emotions, the way we supplement interaction with social platforms, what we do very often now, if we start doing that in a 3D environment, virtual environment, then there's no need anymore. There's less need to have a nice urban space.
So you could have like a park which is pretty plain with the occasional like bench to sit on, but everybody has designed their own virtual park that loads in as they enter the space. So everybody's in the same physical space, but the interactions...
That sounds very dystopian to me.
It does.
It really is. Yeah. But like, that's what I'm saying is like, talk to someone 70 years ago and say that the way you felt like nice, or you had, how do you call it, like you have this trigger, like hormone trigger that makes you feel nice. Endorphins, and you got your endorphins from watching something on a platform instead of actually talking to someone and having a fun time with them. They would have told you you're nuts, and it would have been very dystopian. I'm just putting it out there.
So do you think that because Web 2.0, the internet as we know it now, hasn't hugely fundamentally changed our cities? I mean, it's allowed them to grow far bigger than they ever would.
But
so that's one element.
It hasn't been playing with the way we look at space.
Okay, so you think Web 3.0 will
Definitely.
impact
The
it
moment
more?
we go into that 3D, it will change so much more than we can imagine.
Right.
I don't think we'll strip our actual human environment of actual functionality, like what she's maybe predicting, or
Okay, yeah.
at least that's what I got, like the empty parks and stuff. But,
Yeah.
I mean, for example, I think brick and mortar stores will remain a thing.
Okay.
For the sole purpose, like in the Netherlands, they just built like this big mall of the Netherlands, which is basically a giant theme park with shops.
Yeah.
And it's like an experience that you go to for fun. You don't go there for shopping. You go there because being there is an experience.
Yeah.
So we'll see more of those type of things, and not like a regular like city center where you go to Zara or Bershka or whatever to buy like some shoes. You know?
Yeah.
So and for parks, I think, especially when it would come to that, there will be like plenty of scientists or whatever saying that maybe, you know, seeing a real life park and being in a real life park actually has benefits over being in any metaverse park. So those will also like, remain a thing still.
We can augment things in such a way that it is triggering different things. I don't even if someone would say going to a real park will be better, but then it is always possible to recreate something and trigger more of the same things you would have when you go to the actual park.
In terms of like just directly our mental health, our physical health, I think that working in an office with other people, having to travel there, especially walking or cycling, having to interact with people, all of that is so much better for you than working online. The same with getting food delivered.
Twice a week at least.
Yeah, the same with getting food delivered, but I think like this is supporting Rian's idea that I think humans are fundamentally lazy. We only have so much energy that our brains can burn up. And if we can find a way to reduce the energy it requires to do a certain thing, we often take that.
Yeah, and it's so essential to have the struggle, have the movement, have struggle. And without struggle, we are not really, like, we're not human, not as human.
Yeah.
And this article the other day also said how sitting is the most deadly thing on this whole planet. Sitting down, the amount that we sit on a daily basis is killing us. The more you sit, the more you die. That's kind of the title that it had, and it is
very,
it has
very
been proven.
catchy.
You can find it everywhere. But yeah, sitting, the fact that we sit 8 hours on the desk, go home, sit on the couch, sit in bed, sit to eat. It's destroying us.
Very, very unlike our ancestors. What do you think, Quince?
Yeah, I know sitting is bad.
Yeah, we should probably stand up.
Yeah, we say that as we all sit, and everyone listening is sitting or lying down. Sorry, guys, it's a bummer.
Yeah. But also, sorry.
No, go ahead, Ju.
One more thing. Also, when it comes to these parks, that you can have your own version of the park in augmented reality. Like, I still think it's important to sometimes share the same experience with people, even if the experience itself wouldn't be suited to your personal like needs and preferences. Yeah. So I think we will still see like normal parks as well, for example.
Nice. All right. Well, since we're going into this like crazy, wonderful, imaginary world, I think I'm going to end the podcast with another question that will take it to the extreme of my imagination, at least. So we're no longer talking about sustainable habitat for this last piece, but we're talking about inspiring habitat. Let's talk about what urban living would look like on the moon or on Mars.
It's actually like a pipe dream of mine, I suppose, to work as an urban planner for like a colony on another planet.
Right? How cool would that be?
So cool.
Honestly, I feel like there are so many people, like maybe the other students that are listening to this right now. I think that a lot of people, there are obviously some people that hate it, but I think a lot of people, like urban designers, have that deep down. Is
like,
this?
We want to do this.
Yeah, I don't know how I would do it.
It's like such a new, exciting way.
It's so
of
magical.
Think about how you're gonna create this space.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's also why I want to study spatial development.
Yeah, I mean,
and then I can do spatial development in space. Can you imagine that?
Yeah, spatial development.
I think it will be quite interesting because here we have the opportunity and the luxury to do everything so planned, so drafted, and like not organic. Not as organic, but we have the luxury to take space and create shapes. Whereas if you look at the cities back in the day, many things were more organic, very compact, very clustered, and kind of grew is exactly the way they it was convenient.
They needed to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was causation rather than.
Yeah, and I think that was will be one of the first steps that you'll see in.
Okay, so you're predicting more organicness in space development than, because I would imagine the exact opposite, that everything would be planned down to the.
But I don't think that would be the right step necessarily. I think that's.
Okay.
It's like.
I think if you move to another planet, like you don't have, at least not in the initial stages, you don't have like place for organic development. There's only once you get to that point where people decide by themselves, hey, like I want to move to Mars. Yeah, it's not like in the beginning when we first moved to Mars for like research purposes or something.
Yeah, but once it starts, I think you're right. I think once it starts growing, once it's financially viable to like move there and work, then you're going to see like the population increase, and when that happens, it'll be like, okay, we need to settle near this ice pocket, or this lava cave is available and close enough, so let's just grow into that area.
But also, like, what do you say planned? Because like that's also like the border between planned and organic. What do you?
Yeah, you have to define these terms.
Yeah. And I think like if you would take a boat in like a ship in like 1500s and you'd sail somewhere and you'd set up camp somewhere, it wasn't a pre-calculated plan that once you arrived there it was put there. They had lots of the colonies had planned, like they had pre-set out rules as to how they would do things, so that there was some structure. Yeah.
So, yeah.
I'm just saying.
So actually, maybe that's a good point. That's between you two. So when they get there, they'll follow the map, as Quincy says. There'll be very strict guidelines as to how things develop. And then in the same on Earth, once the city got past that point and they reached maturity and it was going to survive no matter what, it had that reached that critical mass. Mm-hmm. Then I think Rianne's right. You'll start to see these offshoot, these little hey, come, let's do this now. And it starts to get a little bit less decentralized, a little more decentralized. That's fascinating.
I just think that the reason to do something will be closer to when it's built. Whereas in Netherlands, it's often the reason to do something is quite far away. Like this person is searching to get a house, and then it might be whatever development may suit it. Right. But those are close to get there.
Yeah.
It's not like this person needs the house, it gets built. It needs to be closer to each other, and needs to be more interaction.
And obviously at first it'll be communal. So you'll each have your sleeping racks and you'll meet in the communal space to do food and go to the toilet and stuff. How quickly do you see people moving away from that? So how quickly do people have their own room and their own kitchen and their own toilets? What are the factors involved?
Well, and having lived with housemates for the first time for the past few months, I hope as quick as possible. But I think that's really not something we'll see necessarily within our lifetime, or maybe at the very end of it, or maybe beyond it.
Okay.
That's the future.
I think the shift will happen relatively quickly. It really also depends on programming.
Okay.
Human programming. If by the time people go to Mars, most likely it'll be Mars, not the moon.
Yeah.
It really depends on the programming. Yeah. I think as in spatial usage and just efficiency, they won't. They'll stay like that for quite a long time.
Okay. I think my opinion on this is that it's an equation. So you have the material decrease, but you also have psychological increase. So if we experience a lot of issues on these colonies with psychological trauma and conflict and whatever, then maybe the material cost of giving everyone their own space would be advantageous to survival.
Yeah.
So I think that would be one of the major metrics of how quickly people get their own space.
But it's just convenient if the people that are put there don't have the urge in the first place.
Yeah, there are lots of sci-fi movies about altering people's psyche so that they can suppressing. Yeah. Okay, and finally recreation. Let's imagine some urban recreation on these colonies.
What's the point? What's the gravity like?
So the gravity on Mars is 1/3 and the gravity on the moon is 1/6.
And Earth
is 1. So 1/3. So you're 1/3 of the weight on Mars and 1/6 of the weight on the moon.
I think on Mars it will be relatively similar.
Okay.
I'm not sure. I just generally don't know, but I don't think the change
because also
sports will be and sports, for instance, if I'm thinking about leisure.
What kind of sports?
Same as
so physical sports football, hockey.
I think more personal sports as well.
Okay.
So like
Athletics.
athletics.
Yeah.
It's just challenging the human body.
Okay. But bear in mind that each of these spaces required their own vacuum controlled, that's a huge expense in terms of space to create the space for these people to exercise, to play sports, for example.
Then like athletics or like even squash, that doesn't require much space.
That's true.
But still, like the physics work the same, but they have a different translation on Mars, so to speak. So you hit a squash ball and it will behave differently than here on Earth.
Yeah.
So like I think a lot of the sports that we're used to here on Earth cannot be played on Mars the way that you would think, the way that we do it here, unless we like are able to invent some type of like gravity, like football field or whatever,
I think.
But
can I just caveat that thought with, for the first generation of Martians, that's true, but not for the third or fourth.
Mm-hmm.
Because growing up on Mars, you won't develop the same bone density and muscle strength that we have on Earth. So I think sports will look more and more Earth-like as your arm becomes 1/3 the strength of a human arm.
Mm-hmm.
So it begins to possibly.
Yeah, okay. But that also would mean that, there would be complications with those people if they ever want to come to Earth. Like,
If you,
basically, like,
if this is,
implode.
if this is tickling any science geek's mind at the moment, I definitely recommend on Amazon Prime, there's a show called The Expanse, and they explore this as well. There are these people called the Skinnies, and they're people who developed in space. Basically, they spent their whole life in artificial gravity on ships and stuff. And they were like these really long, skinny humans, and they cannot survive on Earth without being in water.
Yeah.
So they're put into these tanks and given face masks to breathe. And for torture, they're like put on the ground.
Yeah.
Or just put on the ground, and that the weight just starts to press on them like they've never felt before. It's dark, but it's also incredibly fascinating. But
but doesn't that also mean that we would have to find like a solution to that? If we want to expand as a species to outer space, then we need a way for those people to come back to Earth in a safe manner. So should we find a solution to that first before we decide to permanently settle there?
Well, that's an interesting question. Do you think if the Europeans knew that they couldn't come back, like, hey, we're going to go to the promised land and we're going to develop this nation, but do you think they would do it if the trade-off was you can't come back? Physiologically, you cannot return.
Back does also
maybe for themselves.
Okay.
Maybe for themselves, that's a decision they would make. Like, I won't be able to come back, because most of the time they weren't able to come back if you were like not nobility or like a rich person or something.
That's true. Yeah.
But I would personally still think like I might not want to go back, but maybe I have like grandchildren or whatever that might want to see what Earth is like where we come from.
Yeah.
So
but even it's not necessarily about going back. It's like you're scaling up, and scaling down seems to be the problem.
What do you mean?
Because the moment you go back, the pressure gets too much. Basically, if you go from Mars back, the pressure comes too much. But it means that if you go from Mars to another planet who has like 1.6, then you can't go back to Mars. So you're constantly scaling up. And you need to find a method to scale down.
This is actually kind of funny because the opposite is Superman. Basically, that's the thesis of the new DC Superman, is that he developed, or that their species developed on a planet that's much, much bigger than ours. So has much, much greater gravity. So they developed muscle strength and bone density far, far greater than we have. So we, compared to the Superman, are these like skinny, helpless things that would be crushed on his planet. But yeah, super fascinating. Anyway, that's the end of the.
Superman is why you can fly and stuff.
It doesn't explain the flying, but it's kind of like a half-assed solution to like, this is why Superman can do what he does. I think like in real life you would be more of a Hulk. So if you were born and raised, over generations on a really big planet, like 3-4 times as big as Earth, the gravity would force you to evolve it and get bigger and stronger to deal with that pressure. You would get a bigger heart or a second heart to make it work.
This interesting, also I'm not sure if it's Netflix, but it's called exoplanets, different planets, and they go basically into like the more like into flora and fauna on different planets and
how they would develop.
And so you have like different species on different planets which are bigger or smaller, and if they do a certain thing, the gravity will react differently.
Interesting.
It's interesting to see how fauna responds.
What was that called, and where can people watch it?
Exoplanets.
On what platform?
I think Netflix, but I don't know for 100% sure.
All right, well, we'll leave you with that recommendation. Thank you guys for joining me to talk about space and and all sorts of things also back here on Earth.
Expecting the whole last part about the metaverse and space and whatever.
Well, I don't think that.
Sustainable cities.
Yeah, I don't think the listeners were expecting that either. But I think it's to reimagine what we have here on Earth, we have to think about how we're going to imagine other places. So I think I could make a strong argument that they're connected. Anyway, thank you listeners, thank you guests, and thank you lecturers. I hope I get a good grade.
And a small after caption, it's called Alien Worlds.